Golden brown texture like sun lays me down. With my mind she runs throughout the night. No need to fight, never a frown with golden brown. Every time, just like the last, on her ship, tied to the mast, to distant land.
Howdy, folks. Your host, Double J, back here, coming at you live from my studio/RV dining room, located directly outside the city of Little Port-au-Prince, Ohio, the city formerly known as Springfield, Ohio, the place where they're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs. Anyhow, folks of the interwebs, I will be your pilot and navigator tonight for this shenanigan-infused journey into the mind of this particular garbage can dude. And thanks for joining me here tonight, folks of the interwebs. Got a real barn burner on deck here for y'all. Drugs, sex, and crypto. Parapolitics in the Idaho 4 case. So, want to walk you folks of the interwebs through some of my thought process here on the Idaho 4 case. It's a case I've been discussing since. Well, I've been very interested in the case since very early on. In fact, I would say around Thanksgiving 2022 is when I first started looking into it, but I was basically grasped immediately. And I'm quite certain I'm not the only one looking at, at the Idaho 4 community on the interwebs and, just general media reports on the subject. This is a case that has gripped lots of folks' attention. Not only here in America, but also, internationally. So this is a very interesting case for a lot of reasons. I think it was, for a lot of folks, I think their attention was captured by this event, these murders back on November 13th, 2022, due to the brutal and rare occurrence of such a horrendous offense, and murders such as these that occurred when, according to law enforcement, they still maintain these individuals were asleep in their beds when these things occurred. A narrative that didn't make a lot of sense to at least me from the beginning, and a narrative that has not bore out well for authorities. And I'm certainly going to be reviewing some of those gaping holes here in the case against Bryan Kohberger. As I've asserted from the beginning, Kohberger did not do it. So this has only bore out well to the facts over time that this case against Kohberger has been manufactured. And that was what really grasped my attention from moment one, was the manufactured appearance of this case against Kohberger. I was obviously, caught my attention to this case as well due to the, again, rare occurrence of, 4 young college students murdered in their home, again, allegedly while they slept. Nonetheless, especially in a sleepy town in Idaho, such as Moscow. So, obviously, I took note of those things. But one of the things I took note of immediately, again, I wasn't really tracking this case between November 13th and November 24th or so of 2022 there on Thanksgiving. However, I recall it occurring. I didn't see the press conference on November 16th, which was the first press conference given in the case by authorities, despite it being 3 days after the murders. They waited 3 days, which there is something to be told about that, I think, as far as they didn't seem to have a lot of urgency to quell any sort of fear amongst the local community, especially if not, the college students, and their families that are, their families that are not living there, the worried parents, if you will. And so when I look back from Thanksgiving time frame, and watched that first press conference on November 26th. I'm sorry, disregard November 16th. And, you know, they immediately came to the microphone with Prosecutor Bill Thompson from Latah County, Chief of Police from Moscow PD, James Fry, right? They're immediately coming to the microphones that day, you know, after the public at large, nonetheless, the folks immediately involved in living in that town, or the students and families were, I'm sure, were worried for 3 days, but they came to the microphone and said, this is an isolated, targeted attack. So when I first heard those terms on or about Thanksgiving 2022, I immediately called bullshit. I said to myself, my immediate thought process on the matter was, there is no way that this law enforcement agency has taken 3 days to make any statements. When they do come to the table, they claim it's an isolated, targeted attack, but then are cagey on all other facets of the interview, the press release, and any questions by the media. For example, there was a few media folks that had questions for James Fry in making these remarks. One of which was when he was describing the surviving roommates who were home during the attack, as he puts it in that press conference. Well, that whole situation's only got more murky since then, hasn't it, folks? The surviving roommates, their conflicting statements, the bizarre media narratives, and I would say even the bizarre actions of these surviving roommates themselves. And again, they're not individual. I'm not singling out individually. Their actions that are bizarre and conflicting statements can only be accomplished with at least the buy-in from law enforcement, the acceptance. If not, they're the ones driving it. I suspect law enforcement's the ones driving these statements, such as the frozen shock phase, as quoted by Brett Payne in his January 6th, the arresting affidavit for Bryan Kohberger that got released on January 6, 2023. Detective Brett Payne of Moscow PD, the lead detective, he quoted Dylan Mortensen, the surviving roommate, as saying, frozen shock phase. That was a quote in his affidavit, citing Dylan Mortensen as the source. Now, the recent text messages released will clearly indicate that there was no frozen shock phase for 8 hours in the immediate aftermath of these alleged murders, as law enforcement has settled on a time between approximately 4:05 and 4:20 a.m. that these murders occurred, and that's precisely the time these text messages began between Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk, the surviving roommates. The text message transcript that was recently released and unsealed. I think there's a lot to be said about that, the actions surrounding why it's unsealed, the validity and veracity of the statements in there, because again, it's a transcript of a transcript, and authorities have not exactly been forthcoming with information in this case, given the unprecedented level of secrecy, the outright denial of discovery to the defendant, discovery cited in that same affidavit, apparently. And I have a video clip of Brett Payne and Bryan Kohberger's defense counsel and Taylor discussing some of that. It's missing evidence from that he cites in his own affidavit that the defense does not have. So, to question whether or not Dylan Mortensen actually said that, I think is reasonable. That, given Brett Payne's other activities, but nonetheless, the police chief is engaging with this reporter, who then begins to ask, I'm back on November 16th. Well, was it, when he announces that the two surviving roommates were in the home, the reporter asked, well, was this a hostage situation? Which, seems to be inferred to be a hostage situation at that point. And he says he didn't say yes or no. He just says, I never said that. So, and I think that's telling. So from this first press conference, the ambiguous nature of law enforcement statements, and the clear, plausible deniability surrounding these statements, meaning he never committed to whether or not the roommates had interacted with anybody or were felt to be a hostage situation on November 16th. We would only learn of this quasi-hostage situation regarding Dylan Mortensen's alleged interactions with the killer and obviously now proven false, frozen shock phase. We wouldn't learn that until the release of the affidavit. This is nearly 2 months later. after this press conference. So, it's the relative comparison of these actions and activities that have, from the onset of this case, that have shown to me real early on, not only just my suspicions of such of these ridiculous statements on November 16th, but the actions that occurred after that long before anyone heard the name Bryan Kohberger. The red flags that had tripped off my brain hole regarding the activities and actions of Moscow PD, ISP, Idaho State Police, and the FBI between November 16th and December 30th, the arrest of Bryan Kohberger and the first public announcement of his name. There's no shortage of obvious violations of protocol, clear confusion and distraction in what I like to call the magic show that is the prosecution against Bryan Kohberger. This is all a magic show, and there's numerous instances of said distractions proceeding again December 30th of 2022. And it was these conflicting statements, the relative comparison of actions and activities here during this time period that really caused me a great concern in this case. And the moment I heard the name Bryan Kohberger and then later read the affidavit, those concerns only deepened. In fact, seemingly with the release of more information in this case, we should have more questions, or we should have more answers than questions, when the answers seem to still be sitting on the table and the questions seem to be increasing in volume here, despite, again, the release of information like the unsealing of these text messages, where again, it completely nullifies the statements that Dylan Mortensen allegedly made as asserted under oath by Brett Payne in his arresting affidavit back in January 2022, that she stood there in frozen shock face after encountering this alleged killer in her kitchen entryway on the way back to the sliding glass door. Not only is that the only piece of evidence that has since been yielded, released publicly in the case, that it proves that story to be bullshit, is, there's also this now blood on the hand railing going down to the first floor. So that implies perhaps that no one even left the back door, even according to their own narrative, right? Which I'm going to go ahead and throw out a disclaimer, folks. The law enforcement narrative, as I'm pointing some of these holes here in the obvious conflicting nature of their statements, again, statements under oath that are clearly not being weighed by the court as any sort of violation, or in this matter, right? Nothing to substantiate anything in favor of Kohberger, despite these conflicting statements by the court. The court's not ruling in favor of Kohberger in any means. I mean, they've been sitting on these text messages for how long when they just now unseal them? Again, I think it's targeted unsealing. I'll get into some of that here this evening as to some of the chronology of events that I think have occurred here recently that have caused the state to change their mode of operations, if you will. I don't think it's pro Kohberger. I don't think Kohberger stands a chance in a court in Idaho. I mean, at this rate, his best chance is a mistrial or the U.S. Supreme Court later. But nonetheless, this seems to indicate what I'm describing here. So it's the from the onset, the conflicting nature of statements that that caused a lot of concerns for me. Then again, these conflicting statements only seem to conflict more over time, and the court seems to want to do nothing about it, including when we're up to nearly 24 discovery requests. The defense doesn't have key pieces of evidence, as seen in hearings over said discovery requests last May. Key pieces of evidence that Brett Payne asserted that he saw videotapes of at least a white car, according to him. Apparently there's only one videotape that was used, video recording, I apologize, that was used to identify allegedly Kohberger's car. This is again, another conflicting statement because, the initial search being for the 2011 to 2013 white Hyundai Elantra, later changed, by an FBI agent who said like, oh yeah, I looked at it again and changed my mind. Well, it just so happens I looked at it again seemingly after the name Bryan Kohberger was at least already being circulated, perhaps. Because now it seems like, according to Brett Payne's statement again in hearings in January, he was just told the name Bryan Kohberger by the FBI, I believe on December 20th, 2022. He's asserted under oath in hearings that he wasn't told anything about the DNA. They just told him this was your guy. So once again, we have more evidence of the FBI from the early onset orchestrating all the key pieces of evidence in this case. We have ambiguous statements by Brett Payne again and again in more plausible deniability. And that was the same plausible deniability that Brett Payne was using last May in ambiguous statements when answering questions about that videotape. So when questioned about the video recording, he's put in his affidavit that he witnessed the white car on. The defense does not have that evidence. And, you know, I question, there's not really, from my understanding, it's not a real, from my assessment, it's not a real consolidated list of all the evidence that has been turned over to the defense and what hasn't, based upon requests and hearings. So that is curious. But what I can tell from that is, you know, again, the ongoing unprecedented secrecy in this case, and they're playing every time when it comes to key pieces of evidence, it's the FBI, and there's nothing but games being played around that key piece of evidence, from the DNA, the IGG investigation, the apparent lack of chain of evidence and lack of lab technicians' notes. So it seems like no one's really tracking the chain of evidence from the the alleged discovery of the knife sheath. You know, there's no clear indicator who bagged and tagged it in evidence, who transported that evidence. There's no clear indicator, apparently, that Altham, apparently the private lab in Texas, apparently did not track their protocols and procedures as they were processing this in their lab. So there's a lot of those games being played, but at the root of it, again, you have the FBI the whole way. And I think that FBI activity is indicative of a larger parapolitical situation going on here in the case, meaning the politics. It's not Bill Thompson prosecuting Bryan Kohberger, as it would appear on paper and in some media reports, right? You have two state attorney generals. And in fact, Thompson decided not to show up to Ada County. And it was only those two state attorney generals prosecuting this case. And since then, and even before then, in some instances, Bill Thompson weighs heavily on these folks' opinion, clearly, because he looks to them for answers when he's stumped. So they seem to be the ones running the show. And it makes sense from a power perspective, a parapolitical power perspective, with some third party weighing in heavily on this situation in the prosecution of a suspect, and that suspect turns out to be Kohberger in this case. You know, these things, I've only seen to bore out over time in the facts, but it was pretty indicative to me, the statements made on November 16th by James Fry, and my first analysis of that around Thanksgiving there, that something else was going on here. You know, you can't make it it's the mutual exclusive nature of the statement, isolated targeted attack, and we have no fucking clue. And they try to do that professionally over time in the subsequent weeks from November 16th. The law enforcement authorities, varying representatives, never the same person, varying representatives from the Idaho State Police and Moscow PD. And it seemed like they were just passing the conch around. You know, you're up next to go make some more lies in front of the camera, because for the subsequent 2 weeks, they could never substantiate the claim that it was an isolated targeted attack. And to date, no evidence has been supported by the state or released publicly that would provide any substantiation to that statement made on November 16th in the first press conference, isolated targeted attack. So that, you know, it was it's the idea that they're going to say that and then again make statements that they have no fucking clue, including on December 7th, 2022, when they announced to the entire world, we need your assistance locating the occupant or occupants of a 2011 to 2013 white Hyundai Elantra seen leaving the murder scene at the time of the murders. Now, that's a real ambiguous statement, and they've made it, and they've kept it as such because, again, the shifting timeline of the murders, and again, the lack of video evidence of what car it's not clear what video they used in which to make that determination, right? Allegedly, the video being used to identify the vehicle by that FBI agent was a camera right around the corner on Ridge Road, you know, maybe 3/4 of a mile from the home. But it's not clear that's what police were using, right? So they're, again, ambiguous statements. These things are left ambiguous for us to fill in our, you know, us folks of the public to fill in the gaps, I think, ourselves, right? Just like on November 14th, 2022, when Lewistown Tribune, the neighboring town there to Moscow, printed an article saying that they were quoting a neighbor saying they looked outside their window the morning of the murders, November 13th, and the morning the bodies were discovered, dead at 4 a.m. discovered apparently shortly after 11:58 when the 911 call was made. But these neighbors apparently looked out their window that morning and saw a group of kids, college students, loitering around the front of the home, a large group of them. So that was quoted in the Lewistown Tribune and ran across almost every outlet, I believe. There was no name given to the witness to this, just, unidentified neighbor, right? So take that for what you will. That narrative but what I'm saying is that laid a seed in folks' minds that when this 911, that laid a seed in folks' minds that when in November and December of 2022, when Moscow and authorities in gang are making statements saying that the 911 call was made from a roommate's cell phone, they would not answer who made that call, right? From the November 16th press conference, the first press conference. These are the statements and seeds they laid in that press conference that they, made from the roommate's cell phone. We still don't know which roommate that cell phone was made from, right? We don't even know which roommate was on the call, allegedly, right? From this recent unsealed release of this 911 transcript. So on top of that, these seeds were laid that there was other students, other friends at the home when police arrived, when the 911 call was made, right? When the 911 call was made, right? They don't say when police arrived, because in fact, we don't really have a great dynamic and understanding of the dynamics surrounding the police response to that home. In fact, I'll bring up an article that's been since deleted, but was published in a local radio publication up there in that area, radio station, I believe an AM station, news radio kind of deal. They published an article quoting Captain Roger Lanier of Moscow PD, and 4 young rookie officers being the first on scene. First I've heard of him being on scene is that article. Well, that's the only instance I've heard. So as per the reports, it claims Officer Smith and other officers were the first on scene. So, we go back to these details, but it's these details that have been laid out and planted in folks' minds through media reports that when other ambiguous statements made by law enforcement are made, it just makes sense, right? When you read an article on November 14th of 2022 saying there were students milling out in front of the home, and then you later hear law enforcement confirm such a report by saying that there was other students at the home when the 911 phone call was made, but they don't tell you there were students there when the cops came there, right? And we don't know the dynamic of the officers and the identity of the officers who responded. And we also don't know what they saw when they responded, right? In fact, the affidavits for arrest were written by Sergeant Blaker, the now chief of police for Moscow, and Corporal Brett Payne. Why Corporal Payne? Obviously, outranked by Sergeant Blaker, why he became the lead detective, despite them both being the first on scene as detectives at 4 p.m. that day, is beyond me. But there's no shortage of these conflicting reports, again, from immediate on. But again, it's what really caused me to weigh heavily on what else is going on in this environment in Moscow, in the whole region there, Pullman, side as well, or just Idaho in general, for that matter, right? Was again the fact that law enforcement was willing to commit to an isolated, targeted attack. And I apologize, I forgot one other detail. The day of the murder, the day the bodies were discovered, the day of the murders, November 13th, somebody made an order to lift the all call to shelter in place and the Vandals alert system there on campus. I believe at 1:30, so an hour and a half after they allegedly discovered these bodies. Now, how in the world, forget 3 days later, how in the world would you know an hour and a half later that you can just tell everybody everything's cool? And then go on to say 3 days later, isolated targeted attack, and then go on to say, make a bunch of statements in the subsequent weeks saying, we don't know. We have no fucking clue. To the point where Moscow PD and ISP decided they were no longer going to do press conferences in front of media. They were going to have no reporters present. It began with a one-on-one. They would do one-on-one sessions. And according to some of those reporters that got denied those one-on-one sessions, they claimed that the questions were pre-selected. So It was a very, very coordinated effort to cut out the media and then pre-select questions. And then that became, we're not taking any more questions from anybody. We'll send you a press release. And I believe that was on or about December 20th. So roughly 6 weeks after the murder, they were done talking to media in any capacity. Because again, they couldn't substantiate the claim, isolated, targeted attack. So it tells me that somebody with a lot of power, somebody with a lot of moneyed interests, very likely, weighed heavily, a third party, weighed heavily in impacting the law enforcement investigation and activity surrounding this matter, if not other matters relative to the murders, right? Because, you know, these things likely all tie in together, right? The cover-up and the crime. So, you know, I think in that notion, in that thought, the first reasonable person to look at for weighing heavily on the law enforcement investigation is the University of Idaho president, Scott Green, or the U.S. or the state's attorney general's office, right? You know, there would be another party, because these things are obviously working hand in hand to some regard, the law enforcement locally, the state's office. And again, it's clear the state's office is the ones pushing on a downward fashion, politically speaking, on this case. But the nonetheless, the Scott Green, very interesting character. So when I first started looking at this case in a parapolitical sense, you know, December 2022, January 2023, you know, looking at the environment in that area to see what else is going on, you know, looking at the financials of the town, looking at the financials of the university, right? Seeing who the university president is, seeing who the politicians are, right? Taking a lay of the land. And I quickly realized, you know, looking at the universities and the towns, I was also looking at their crime reports, right? What sort of crime are they experiencing in these areas, right? And they claim this was the first murder in forever. They make a lot of statements around that subject that I think are bogus. Notably, if you don't rule a murder, it's never a murder. That's very indicative of the kind of smiley face killing cases that I cover here a lot on OpGCD and on the Occult Rejects. We've done some great series over there as well on the subject. But in all of those cases, they're ruled accidental, and that's why they're never really investigated. Because once you mark it accidental, the coroner, that is, then there is no investigation. So, and in fact, there's a death like that related to these fraternities, right? So Hudson Lindow, member, I forget which fraternity he was a member of. He dies. He goes to a party on April 30th there in Moscow, and he apparently, it's a fraternity party. He apparently does not, disappears from that night somehow, some way, right? No one really knows the whereabouts, because again, no one investigated these things. And we're talking about this Greek system, as we've seen here in this case. These college students aren't saying a word, you know, from the Snapchat DMs, text messages that were going around that morning amongst the Greek life students on Pullman and Moscow, you know, WSU and Idaho, University of Idaho. You know, no one's really ever talked about that within those communities. They're all keeping very quiet. So this is a community that does understand silence to the public at large, and also maintains their problems within. They have councils, they have boards, they keep these things internally if they do have problems, much like a gang mafia or whatever would, right? So the this level of secrecy, you know, even if someone did investigate Hudson Lindow's death, I don't suspect we'd have anything different. But as it is, Kathy Mabutt ruled it an accidental drowning, and there is no investigation. But Hudson Lindow, 19 years old, disappeared April 30th, found May 1st, the next day, in Paradise Creek in a few inches of water, allegedly drowned, right? So he was a member of, I get all these Greek organizations completely wrong. I don't see it listed here on his obituary either. But he was definitely part of the Greek system there, famously or infamously, I suppose. Sadly, of course. But yeah, he's photographed, even seen in photographs standing there adjacent to the murder home at 1122 King. So, you know, I've read allegations that the victims, the 1122 King victims, were at the same party that Hudson Lindow was at. I've yet to been able to confirm that. It's an interesting notion, because I suspect Much like Caden Young's death 4 months after the murders in March of 2023, I suspect that these Greek deaths, that there's, the deaths and untimely deaths and murders of these, young, college students in the Greek fraternities and sororities there on campus. I suspect there's more to that story, that the departure from these organizations, much like a gang or a mafia, blood in, blood out, especially if you're engaging in some of the activities that it seems like these organizations may in fact be engaging in and have been for a while, a long-term historical trend, if you will. But for the most part, murder is not the highest crime over there in those areas, Pullman and Idaho, by any means. It's drugs. They have a real drug problem in both of those towns. They have a real drug problem in and around the murder home. There is no shortage of drug possession charges, tickets issued in the immediate vicinity, in and around, I'd say within a half-mile vicinity of, draw a circle, half-mile, in every direction. There's a lot of drug charges in and around both the Greek rows of both towns. So if you were to look to see where the focus and center of the drug culture is in either town, it's not in an industrial section. It's not in the Section 8. It's over by them Greek college students. So I think there's a lot to be said about that, right? And again, it's not without examples that these specific organizations on these campuses have been involved in large-scale drug trafficking. In fact, it seems to be about every 4 or 5 years somebody gets busted from one of these organizations. When I say busted, I mean that busted, because I believe the cocaine trafficker out of the Alpha Pi House, the same over on Pullman in Washington State, the same sorority that Kaylee Gonzalez was a part of, but she was a part of the University of Idaho chapter, despite these two campus chapters integrating and functioning essentially as one in large part. I mean, not in everything, but they do a lot of joint efforts together based upon a review of their activities. And both universities and towns do as well. These places, despite being in two different states, two different campuses and whatnot, these places function largely as one. When you look at, again, the way they do law enforcement, so they have a joint 911 operations center. They have a joint SWAT team. They have a joint drug task force. So the two counties on the Washington side and the sheriffs, the prosecutors, the chiefs of police, they comprise the board of the drug task force on there, and that's the west side. Then they have the east side drug task force, which encompasses all of Latah and Moscow. There includes the folks such as Bill Thompson, right? James Fry, right? Gary Jenkins over there in Pullman. These folks are all sitting on the boards of this joint drug task force, right? A joint drug task force, when I say busted, they released a press release in 2019 citing a fraternity running a pill stamping operation, pill stamping Xanax pills, not only sell them around town and campus, but sell them as far as Seattle. So I try to find some more information on this. I don't have concrete information on the precise fraternity. I believe I've located it, and I have no idea the culprits in this crime, because as I search the court system, I don't know if it's sealed. I don't know if they didn't prosecute these folks, but there does not seem to be any substantial record of evidence outside of this one press release. So my point being here is, it's not new. It's not these victims didn't go to campus and start dealing drugs. What it seems to me is that they got involved in a much larger drug trafficking culture that pre-existed amongst these Greek organizations, seemingly under the guise of approval by the folks that are prosecuting Kohberger, again, on these drug task force elements. And on top of that, again, I'm not trying to diminish the victims or their families. There was obviously some drug trafficking connections to Xana Kernodle's mother. She was busted for heroin trafficking and meth possession in August 22 in Nez Perce County, Washington. They're part of the drug task force. Same task force there as Whitman County, Pullman. There's obviously some of that going on, right? But what seems to me to be the most impactful thing here regarding drugs in this scene is again the fraternities and sororities. And again, as we've seen, not just locally here in this case, but around the U.S., these organizations maintain their secrets very well. They maintain their secrets extremely well, including their former members. So not just the current members in college, right? So they have a lot of alumni functions, a lot of alumni efforts. I don't know how else to put these things. I don't know what goes on in these organizations. I do have an old friend of mine from the Air Force who was a fraternity president when he was at West Virginia University. I have attended parties with him. I went to a football game with him there one time at WVU, and we stopped for whatever reason. He had to go stop by his old fraternity house for a function. This is 15 years after college for him, maybe. And he walks in the place like he's a god. So he was a former frat president at that chapter, but 15 years later, he can walk in there and, it's like Cheers. Everybody knew his name. So I don't know what goes on in these organizations. I don't really care to know. It doesn't seem good, right? It doesn't seem positive, even for the folks involved in them, right? It really doesn't seem like a lot of folks have a lot of positive experiences. When you look at some of what goes on in these things with the hazings and the initiations, like I have to imagine that those activities don't stop at the hazing initiation. There's some other weirder, like they got to get you on the ground floor of weird shit before they escalate the weird shit, right? It's like that's the ground floor of weird shit. I don't imagine it gets worse from there. So, yeah. The drug culture, I think one common misconception I've heard or seen from folks that the drug stuff was, exclusive to these victims and maybe some of their family members are also clearly involved in drug stuff, trafficking nonetheless. I suspect those two things could intersect, but they don't have to, right? So, when am I going to Moscow? I was just trying to catch up here on some of these chats as I'm, meandering about my thoughts here. I don't know if I might go to Moscow, Russia before I go to Moscow, Idaho. I'm not going to lie to you. But the way I look at it is, yes, there is obviously some personal family related drug issues with some of the victims, trafficking, etc. Again, that doesn't necessarily have to have any play into this, despite that drug trafficking stuff can't be that far separated from the Greek culture drug trafficking stuff. These drug channels, especially in a small, rural area such as this, they're going to intersect. But I'm just saying it's not necessarily that they didn't have to get recruited into this situation through such methods, but it seems that, again, and from the way I look at it, this is my thought processes on the matter. Again, after establishing the clear, drug situations going around these campuses, the epicenter of activity near the Greek centers of the campuses, the instances of the Greek organizations doing large-scale drug trafficking, cocaine, Xanax pills, Caden Young, the fraternity president from University of Idaho, gets a hot shot, cocaine-laced fentanyl in Seattle. He's there with two Moscow drug dealers, right? So those folks later get their charges dropped. I've yet to see a great answer on what went on there, but nonetheless, I think that indicates, the great distance some of these the Moscow drug activities may travel to Seattle, and it may be for, because Seattle's a port. Maybe that's where they're getting some of their materials from. I don't know, but it seems to indicate between the 2019 pill stamping operation to the Caden Young incident that not only this covers a great distance, but that as Caden Young, before he got his hot shot, apparently he quit being the frat president. So it seems that leaving these organizations may in fact be a death sentence for folks. Maybe not all. Maybe folks in the know, frat presidents who are intimately familiar with these channels and distribution and logistics of the matter. Folks who live in 1122 King, which may have served as a drug distribution point for many, many years, given the history and volume of drug possession charges in the immediate vicinity. And given the fact that home has long been occupied by students of the Greek organizations. So in the years preceding the murders, it became occupied by sorority girls, seemingly all Phi Beta Pi, which later makes Kaylee Gonzalez an outlier in that. So it makes you wonder, did she even know any of this stuff was going on? Perhaps that begs the question, because she was not in that sorority. But that being said, again, her sister sorority over on WSU had, their chapter on WSU, they had a cocaine trafficking problem there. So anyhow, I'm just saying it's not necessarily Sigma Chi. It's not necessarily Phi Beta Phi. That's why I say it's the Greek organizations. This seems to indicate there's maybe a larger situation. Again, not all of them, maybe not every chapter or every house or whatever, but it seems to be somewhat widespread. And again, when looking at the when taking that into consideration, of like for example, if from 1999 to circa 2017, it was 1122 King was occupied by largely one fraternity house. It seems early on in the case, I wanted to understand again the environment. So looking at the ownership of the home, and then doing searches on the past residents of the home, I compiled a list that is comprised of predominantly one fraternity house, largely Sigma Chi. So that's what I'm saying. That's why I preface that with saying I'm not pointing my finger at Sigma Chi and Phi Beta Pi, but that home has largely been occupied by Sigma Chi and Pi Beta Phi for the last 26 years, or whatever, 23 years preceding the murder, right? So, these I think it's also should be noted that at the time of the murders, these two organizations were on suspension for drug and alcohol related activities. Now, we'll never know what those drug and alcohol related activities were. And the double frontal probation these organizations were on by the university. And there's probably a lot more going on there that we will never understand or know, but nonetheless, they do have a culture, it seems like, in these places. And again, these are the folks that apparently have largely occupied that home, 1122 King. So what I'm looking at that as is perhaps that was a drug distribution point, given the volume of drug possessions and history of drug possessions in the immediate vicinity, given the residents of the home, given the rumored nature of the home amongst the townsfolk. These are things that have been rumored. So, and when you're talking about probations by the university on these organizations, and back to the parapolitics in this situation, I've kind of given us a bit of a longer tour than I expected on the drugs and the parapolitics coming next when you think of Scott Green, the university president, right? So he's not only grew up in Moscow, he also went to University of Idaho. He also was a fraternity member, I believe, a fraternity president at University of Idaho. To the best of my understanding, he was a fraternity president, and he's now the university's president. And it's in a very unorthodox move at a very unorthodox time. And that ties directly into the crypto situation here, right? I just want to get to the parapolitics portion as I rambled on too much about the drugs, which I could go on literally all day about. And I have some examples I'll show us on some of those topics here in a moment. But the sex aspects of it. So obviously drugs, a lot of evidence and indicators. Not a lot of evidence, but a lot of indicators for sex trafficking going on in these situations. And it wouldn't be the first time that sorority girls were sex trafficked, right? Like I got, there's not a lot of examples in the sex trafficking. There are some that seem to really draw an eye and make you wonder, like, what happened? How did this get so bad? For example, the Sarah Lawrence incident. While I'm on the topic, I'll bring this up for a visual aid in the matter. The Sarah Lawrence incident, which I believe I spoke about this before. It was the incident in a Hudson Valley College in New York. I believe it was out in 2016, where a father of a student at that college, all-female school, right, was living in the female. It's an all-female dorm. It's an all-female college, right? This fellow Larry Ray here, he actually started in 2010. I was off by a few years. Holy shit, earlier than I thought. But Sarah Lawrence sex cult, ex-student sue say college knew evil genius dad was in dorm. How would they not know, right? You have this. I mean, I don't have a picture handy. I should have. Larry Ray is a very distinguishable, kind of a greasy looking old dude, right? Like he's living in an all-female. He's on an all-female campus, living in an all-female dorm, pimping out these girls for years, right? Sex trafficking his daughter and her friends out of that dorm, living in that dorm. So when these victims sue the college, I mean, they make a great point. I mean, I'm sure I don't know enough about the evidence to ascertain whether or not they have any, but I'm presume they do, because there's no way that you see this dude come, even if you're like, let's say you're not involved in you're a third party passerby or witness to these matters in the dorms there. You're going to see this old dude walking in your dorm all day long. And you're like some young 19-year-old females creeped out by this old dude's always in your dorm. Like, you may be wondering, why is this old dude in my dorm? And then you report it to the campus authorities, right? And they're like, oh, we're not going to, we have no idea what you're talking about, So plausible deniability, right? So these things have occurred due to the secrecy, I think, of these organizations. I think we know less about it than I think it's more commonplace. I should say it's more commonplace than I think we know about publicly, right? Now, again, there's other incidents besides that one. That one seems to be a really egregious one, though, to me, because there's no way that college did not know. For years, these girls are being pimped out of an all-female campus and all-female dorms. Now, there's an incident back in 1987, I think this was. Yeah, 1987, Southern Methodist University down there in Dallas. They paid sorority women, the boosters, so the SMU boosters, the folks that fund the athletics and whatnot. They paid the sorority women, the girls or ladies, to have sex with the football recruits. As part of a recruiting effort. Come to Southern Methodist University, a real religious institution. We're going to hoe out these sorority girls for you. Come sign up on our football team. The idea of which is preposterous. So it's not always a greasy old dude living in a female dorm. It could be the boosters who work with the university, in some instances for the university with some of those folks. And they're the ones pimping out the sorority girls. So not only folks like that. Now, I don't think that I don't see any signs that the boosters of the Vandals boosters of University of Idaho are pimping out these sorority girls to the football recruits at University of Idaho. Now, what I suspect is going on there is somebody's pimping these girls out. So back to an early analysis in the case back in November 2022. Pardon me. I got some Chipotle's coming back to haunt me here. Chipotle bowl coming back to haunt me. But the back in November 2022, we got Baylor. It happened to Baylor too, huh? Texas likes hoeing out their sorority girls. See, that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't, that SMU one stuck out in my head, and I appreciate that note too, because it does seem like this is probably more frequent occurrence. Again, I have more examples, but to the point of the victims here in the case and the local environment going on there in Idaho and probably Washington State University too, is the symbiotic nature of these, at least not only the universities, the towns, the law enforcement, but also the Greek organizations. When I did an early analysis of the social media before, and some of the fraternity stuff too, as well, just to get an analysis of that situation, a lot of these things were scrubbed in late November, early December. And I do have some photos that were scrubbed to share with folks here, which I'll get into presenting some of those things after I get through my long-winded statements on the matter, to put some context, try to make all this make sense, right? And a lot of ins, a lot of outs, couple what have yous, but it seems that I think that this is the environment that I picture, that I see from my perspective, that has impacted this case, right? It's not one thing, it's multiple things. It's the environment that these things operate in, right? And the people that are involved in these things, like Scott Green. So I'm not saying Scott Green's pimping anybody out, but I'm saying he's involved in the parapolitical aspects surrounding this, including being a driving force, I strongly suspect, behind a lot of the statements and actions of Moscow PD, like isolated targeted attack, like lifting the Vandals alert an hour and a half later. I presume it was Scott Green that made both of those calls. Anyhow, on the social media accounts of these victims and some of their sorority sisters, because again, I looked at the sororities and looked at some of the sorority sisters to see if this was an exclusive thing to these victims, or did I see the same trends going on and patterns going on with their sorority sisters? And I did. So it seems that on top of these young women being dressing nice, makeup, hair, these things all cost money. They have cars, they live off campus, they go to college. They do have part-time jobs, but what limited time and money can they make in those part-time jobs to substantiate the lifestyle in which they're living, right? I don't think those two meet up. they do not comport the lifestyle and small financial aspects of working a part-time job as a waitress, right, or a coffee shop, right. And of course, you look at folks like Kayla Gonzalez. She's got an unpaid internship ahead of her. Apparently living expenses in Texas, but she's got not a new Range Rover, but a nice used Range Rover, not cheap. So the thank you. So when I look at what's going on with these women outside, the way they dress, the way they function, they're always out partying. This stuff costs money. I used to party a lot, far more than these young women did, even by all appearances. I mean, far more than most folks in the military party, in fact. But nonetheless, I know what it costs to be a young 19, 20, 21-year-old getting a good paycheck from the Air Force. I joined at 17. I was making decent money by their age. After being in a few years, couple pay grades up. I was always broke at that age. I mean, I partied a lot, but I was always broke at that age. You know what I mean? Living expenses, car, insurance, food, partying, right? After that, you know what I mean? I didn't have hair, makeup, I probably had a hoodie and shorts, you know what I mean? I kind of still dress the same. So what I'm saying is the logistics, the monetary logistics of the situation didn't look right to me. Then I see these young women traveling from to various destinations, East Coast, Miami, San Diego, to the West Coast, San Diego, Las Vegas, Portland, Hawaii, right, during the school year, right, by the appearance of the pictures, by themselves. In fact, not with boyfriends, seemingly not with friends. And in fact, one of their boyfriends even quoted in one of their Instagram pictures, top comment, I wish I could travel to these places with you. I don't know if he couldn't travel because he wasn't invited, because it was the school year, because he didn't have any money. But nonetheless, these factors should all weigh heavily on their schedule as well, these young women. But yet they're traveling places, they're dressing nice, they're looking nice, they have money, they're partying, they got cars, they're living, they're not maybe living high on the hog, but they're living a lot better than most folks at that age, right? So it draws into question, is it drug trafficking perhaps that's that's providing them some of this income? Is it also, that's not mutually exclusive to sex trafficking. So is there also sex trafficking? And again, when you look at the history of some of these sorority organizations, SMU, the other Texas university that was pointed out there in the comments, the Sarah Lawrence situation, where clearly the administration of the university, I would suspect all of the upper echelon, including the law enforcement on the university, they all knew. There's no way, there's no shortage of calls by other women on that campus and in that dorm building that didn't say, like, why is this greasy old dude always up in here? I have no doubt. I've never seen any evidence. I just have no doubt. So when these things go on and you have all these inexplicable monetary and living, situations of these victims and their sorority, at least some of their sorority sisters, right? It begs the question, are these women being pimped out and being sent to these various destinations during the school year, right? So not only just the money aspects, but during the school year. So I think that should be questioned, especially when you're looking at the environment that's going on there in that town and the other activities of folks in that town and the decisions they make. And, it really begs the question. So as I've taken a very long-wind tour of explaining a lot of these things, I'll demonstrate some of these details here. But first, I want to put on a video by Brett Payne to emphasize, again, the holes. Well, I'll do this first, actually. So, and emphasizing, again, so I've kind of painted the environment of power, with the exception of the crypto, which I'll get into with Scott Green here momentarily, because one of the things I've kind of theorized from the beginning here. You can find a podcast of my early evolutions of these thoughts from back in February of 2023 on the farm. Mach 2 podcast with Recluse, Steven Snyder. Awesome dude, great show, highly recommend it. I've done a number of shows over there with him since then. And he's been on Operation GCD. I recommend all of those shows, but the Idaho one specifically, I believe it's also on my RSS feed. But I've evolved some of these ideas since then. But once I realized the holes in the case, right, where the roommates are on the first floor, they're in frozen shock phase, and now they're text messaging each other, right? Once I kind of went through all these kind of details, right, then I and selling the parapolitical stuff, and then saw the drug stuff, saw the potential sex trafficking. Then I said, well, they got to be putting this money somewhere, right? And I want to better understand if there's any instances of money laundering in the area. And I just want to look at the FDIC reports of the banks in the area, right? Starting in Pullman and Moscow. I didn't get very far with those ventures, but then I stumbled across Moonstone Bank, formerly known as Farmington State Bank, 45 miles north of both universities, right on the border. 30 miles, 45-minute drive. Now, that place has had a real problem with money laundering, courtesy of FTX, the cryptocurrency exchange that of Sam Bankman-Fried, who's now currently sitting in a New York, or was sitting in a New York prison cell with P. Diddy until recently. He gave an interview with Tucker Carlson, and now he's on solitary confinement, apparently. But it's interesting because Sam Bankman-Fried and P. Diddy have the same attorneys, and P. Diddy, for some reason, made that visit to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, right before he got arrested. So, really makes you wonder, in a parapolitical sense, what the hell is going on in this regions of these activities. But to the point of Moonstone Bank, so Moonstone Bank / Farmington State Bank, I actually learned about this before I looked at their FDIC report. So when I started looking at the money laundering situation, etc., I was also looking at the FTX situation, right, kind of simultaneously, because FTX, the cryptocurrency exchange, they filed bankruptcy on November 11th, 2022. A very shocking incident. A lot of folks didn't expect it. Let me bring something up here to demonstrate that point here, because this was a very contentious situation between FTX and a similar firm, a cryptocurrency exchange called Binance that was largely Chinese backed. And in that effort, Binance was going to buy out FTX. Apparently, FTX hadn't made it public yet in the beginning of November 2022, but they were definitely broke, right? And then turns out Binance, this other exchange, was going to buy them out. Well, they just happened to secretly own, in like an arbitrage fashion, like 30% of FTX's cryptocurrency, right? So they did issue a cryptocurrency as like an unregistered stock in their crypto exchange, right? So Binance owned something like 30%. And during this exchange and merger and acquisitions process, Binance sells all of their coin, which tanks FTX. So this is what I'm saying. I was tracking FTX because I have no interest in investing in crypto. I have interest in following crypto because, as it's been demonstrated since Sam Bankman-Fried's been busted, it's only used for money laundering, and that's strongly my opinion on all of crypto. But nonetheless, so Binance sells all of its coin, and suddenly FTX was without any options. Right? Took me a while to find that. I knew I had it here somewhere. So suddenly they're out of options, right? Binance backs out of FTX rescue, leaving the crypto exchange on the brink of collapse. I would argue this was set up by Binance, right, in this arbitrage fashion. So they have, so FTX, at least amongst backdoors amongst these companies, and they have the same legal counsel. So the people handling this merger and acquisition, back to Scott Green's old law firm, right? They're called Hogan Lovells. He was the CFO, the chief financial officer, and the chief operating officer from 2016 to 2019 when he took the job at the University of Idaho. And I say that's important. Their relationship with that law firm, Hogan Lovells, starts in around shortly after the time Scott Green leaves and goes to the University of Idaho. However, I think it's important to put a pin on that date because this is not till 2022, but back in 2019, FTX is already heavily engaged in paying off the chief regulatory officer for the state of Washington, starting back in 2018, paying him off so that they can merge banking, regular old banking, and crypto into one organization, which was the efforts, coincidentally enough, of Sam Bankman-Fried on Capitol Hill, testifying in front of Congress And the people they have as the experts in those hearings, Hogan Lovells. So preceding the 2022 mergers and acquisitions here and lobbying that Binance and FTX hired Hogan Lovells for, Scott Green's old law firm that he ran, they were already operating up in Washington in the area of Farmington State Bank, north of both universities, in which to purchase that bank by paying off the state's regulatory agency and then hiring the head of that regulatory agency to become the chief legal counsel at Moonstone Bank, Farmington State Bank that they changed to Moonstone Bank. It's like a 110-year-old bank that did farming and local community deposits, and then suddenly Sam Bankman-Fried and his creepy French business partner Jean Chalopin, the inventor of the cartoon Inspector Gadget, suddenly they come into town and buy up this bank, and again mashing crypto and banking into the same roof, which violates the FDIC and other federal laws. Again, they paid off the state, not the feds. That comes to an issue later. But the folks that are the experts at the federal level, that are providing commentary on such regulation, is that what Bankman-Fried was trying to accomplish himself by testifying, again, Scott Green's law firm, Hogan Lovells. So back to November 2022, Binance backs out. They sell all the coin, then they back out. So that means they tanked the value of FTX by selling all their coin in like a hawk to a meme coin disaster style event, right? And then, so again, the people handling this merger, Hogan Lovells, again, Scott Green's folks, and then FTX suddenly has to file bankruptcy, right? They have no other options. So this was a this is November 9th, right? So this is a very intentional thing, right? So they're left with no other options. Shit's hit the fan. They're left with no other options. FTX files emergency bankruptcy 2 days later. As a result of that emergency bankruptcy, right, it is discovered that they bought out through a $50 million quote-unquote secret loan that was never put down on paper before this bankruptcy, apparently, to this Jean Chalopin fellow, the head of Deltec Bank. He's also been busted for money laundering, or his bank has. No one gets held accountable, right? But the banks are being busted, right? Maybe SBF. Only time will tell there, right? Sam Bankman-Fried, that is. But, they file bankruptcy, and then, all of a sudden, this is November 30th, 2022, right? Everyone starts looking into the situation, right? And suddenly, by December, a month later after this article here, late December 2022, on or about the time they're arresting, or we now know that the Idaho authorities learned the name Bryan Kohberger December 20th. I believe it was December 22nd, 2 days later. The feds busted this bank for money laundering, seizing $60 million. Now, there's been a lot of back and forth over the year and a half after that where things got settled and fines got paid. And one of those things they were trying to figure out, and some of those fines that were getting paid, was how in the hell did this cryptocurrency industry invade this small bank in the middle of nowhere, Washington State? So one of the lingering questions for the cryptocurrency industry is how the incredibly small and foreign-owned Farmington State Bank, now Moonstone Bank, was able to acquire regulatory guidance under the Federal Reserve, right? Like I said, they paid off the state regulatory agency, hired the head of it as their chief legal counsel. He quits shortly after this, of course, right? He resigns. But they didn't do it to the feds. But the feds, after the fact, were like, the FDIC was like, I don't know. So looking at the FDIC reports, I said it was a small bank. The first month that they came in to buy that bank, the deposits increased like 1,000% month to month. Like, it just gets worse from there. So like the idea, like even on paper, looking at from an FDIC report, like you're like, wait a second, that's all, So obviously they were out to lunch. I'm sure paid off, but it did become an issue in the FDIC after that. And again, this matter became an issue for somebody, discussing the parapolitical stuff here. Somebody like the chief legal officer of the parts FTX-linked Moonstone Bank, right? So this was the guy that was running this is January 6th, 2023. So literally he's quitting the day that they bring Kohberger back to Idaho, right? So the chronology of events here really dawned on me early on. And I was like, well, if there is parapolitical impact weighing in heavily on this, which had already decided, and I'm tracking this FTX thing simultaneously to this Idaho case, I'm like, wait a second. Why are these two things intersecting in the same geographical location when I'm already suspecting the Idaho case to be surrounded by money laundering? So lot to be said there. So going further into that matter is when I realized that not only was there this weird kind of FDIC turn their head, right? And then the timeliness of the prosecution of this money laundering operation in December, right? Again, 2 days after we learned Kohberger's name, the guy quits the same day Kohberger comes back to Washington. These things are all happening in and around the same time, in and around the same geographical area. And, you know, if money laundering does impact this case by virtue of these Greek organizations, then I suspect this is, you know, the bank it was being laundered to. And it's a great money laundering operation, you know, cash to crypto, right? So, you know, this became an issue, and no one could really answer these questions. Why did FTX buy into a U.S. bank owned by co-creator of Inspector Gadget? So he runs a bank out of Miami, Deltec Bank. Bankman-Fried was out of the Bahamas with his FTX situation, right? Despite being incorporated into Delaware, like most corporations are, his base of operations was in the Bahamas because of their banking laws, and he paid off their regulators, it turns out. So SBF's going around paying off regulators. The federal regulators he tried to convince, probably trying to pay off. Again, their expert in those hearings, Hogan Lovell, right? So FTX and Binance hire Hogan Lovell in 2022 officially, despite the clear associations preceding this. And again, Hogan Lovell does the merger, right? After the fallout, November 9th, and the subsequent bankruptcy, you know, of that merger, right? November 11th, right? And then the murders, the early morning hours, allegedly, the early morning hours of November 13th. So the world finds out FTX bought this weird bank. The feds immediately start looking into it, as I showed you here. They were in there a month later and charges 6 weeks later in this bank and seizing funds 6 weeks later. So, you know, it's the chronology and sequence of events here, right? So, you're looking at these things, you know, it's hard to say, you know, precisely that this is what's going on with the murders, but it seems to provide a reasonable, because everything looking at it right now, nothing about this case has been reasonable, but like, you know, it's hard to tell what the impetus was for these murders. The states provide no motivations, right? They fail to establish the nexus point of the suspect to the victims. They fail to place them at, you know, no communications, no knowledge. They fail to place them at the scene of the crime, with the exception of this knife sheath that gets shiftier by each you know, more data is released about it and unsealed. It gets to be a more shifty situation. You know, still Ann Taylor saying, you know, I see the knife sheath in the first responding officer's body cam video. That's what her statement was in court. Who that officer is yet to be identified. Was it Officer Smith or one of the other first responding officers? As per the reports, who knows? But then she goes on to describe how, despite that being there, the knife sheath doesn't appear in photographs of that same scene. So I don't think she's seen the knife sheath physically. So I question still if there even is a knife sheath to be produced. And if they do produce one, I question if that was ever at the scene in the first place. But nonetheless, it's the, you know, it's the sequence of events. Again, if these things aren't connected, then what's the driving force behind, you know, the ignoring the DNA evidence under the fingernails, the ignoring the blood evidence, the jamming the case into Kohberger, the lie after lie after lie of how you got to Kohberger, the conflicting statements of accounts of the narrative. I mean, it goes on and on. Again, sworn statements and affidavits and hearings. I mean, this is not, this is all unprecedented in addition to the secrecy, right? So, you know, on that same note, relative to matters of Scott Green, you know, and his former associates of the firm he was the chief financial and chief operating officer of, you know, the folks that were doing that merger of Binance and FTX, Hogan Lovell's, you know, they're headquartered in London and in New York City. So I try to figure out if their mergers and acquisitions department is located in both locations. I couldn't tell. But it is interesting to note that the head of the mergers and acquisitions department, at least in the London office, quit the same day FTX filed bankruptcy. Again, this is the law firm and lobbying group that Scott Green ran. And these are the folks that were involved in the regulations of cryptocurrency, the same kind of regulations that Sam Bankman-Fried's paying folks off for in the Bahamas, paying folks off for in Washington State. Apparently paying folks off at the FDIC, not to change the laws, just look the other way. But nonetheless, these are the folks that the U.S. government relies upon, Hogan Lovell, as experts in these regulatory proceedings, right? They are the experts. In congressional hearings, they're like, hey, the Hogan Levels attorneys here. Let's see what she has to say. So these things, I strongly suspect they're heavily related. Strongly suspect. And again, looking at some parapolitical thing is weighing heavily on these matters, right? So one thing I discussed recently, I've done a number of hours in the last 2 weeks over there on Kane B's The Purge. Highly recommend folks check out Kane B's The Purge for some Idaho information. He's got a length of videos of very historical nature to revisit some of these ideas from the past, right? One of those ideas I revisit from the past from conversations in discussing this case over there on Kane's show is the fact that this I watched and I'll show this video in a moment to go back to, obviously something's pressuring these people to do things from a third party parapolitical nature, right? It's very, very indicative of what's going on here. This is pressure from somewhere else. And again, I'm pointing to folks like money laundering, fraud, and folks associated with the University President, right? Who again came in 2019 in a very unorthodox move against all. He wasn't a good candidate. No higher education employment, no PhD, things that you normally seek for in a university president. The Department of Education in the state wasn't a big fan. Still aren't, for different matters, but nonetheless, very contentious individual, from moment one. So I think there's a lot to be said about that too. Just the contentious nature, why they would hire somebody with that background, right? Nonetheless, somebody's pressuring these things. So back in May of 2024, and as I discussed recently on Kane B's The Purge there, I was watching the testimony of Brett Payne in May of last year in that hearing, and he's describing how he doesn't have video, the video recordings I mentioned earlier he was questioned about from his that he relied upon in his affidavit, right, sworn under oath, in the arresting affidavit. He says, oh, the FBI's got those. So, yeah, I can't give those to you. I'm like, well, how can he play that game by saying the FBI's got the evidence and the judge doesn't do anything about it, right? So I was like, the only thing he can really do is he's telling the truth. The FBI does have the evidence because the FBI ran a separate grand jury, right? I was calling it a secret grand jury, but turns out, revisiting the past, I looked through, I was watching some videos and stuff on Kane's show, and I came across some of this information again from last year, how the grant. So it says right here, this is a dated Idaho Statesman, May 31st, 2024, right after the hearings. Defense for defendant Bryan Kohberger signals evidence challenges in Idaho murder case. Scroll down here and it says state prosecutors in the University of Idaho student homicide case relied on a federal grand jury to obtain dozens of subpoenas to build their case against suspect Kohberger. It was revealed for the first time at a hearing Thursday. I don't think they revealed that in that hearing. I mean, they did. They revealed it. And again, I took note of it. I don't think they formally outright said, hey, we ran a separate federal jury on you. Despite we're not prosecuting this under federal court, we ran a separate federal grand jury here on you. And in fact, we're not going to give you any of that evidence because this is a state court. That seems to be the games they're still playing here today with this case. So not only does the parapolitical pressure involve seemingly at least the university president and immediately local authorities, right? Which again, I would assert revolves around the topics of drug trafficking, perhaps sex trafficking, and involves matters such as crypto and money laundering at that bank. Once again, with folks associated with the university president. I would also say that, these revelations with the notion of the FBI grand jury and the admittance of it and the lack of evidence being provided, evidence that was relied upon in the sworn arresting affidavit back in January of 2023, right? Well, technically December 30th, 2022, released to the public a week later. It's these things that indicate to me that it's a higher order of power, right? It goes not only to the state attorney general's office, this would indicate it goes at least the attorney general's office for the state of Idaho, the U.S. attorney general, or the U.S. attorney assigned as the U.S. attorney for Idaho, because that's who runs the federal jurisdiction there. That's who runs the FBI there, right? So it would have to include them. And in consideration of that, right, it made me think, well, if that's the case, well then what is going on when we see changes in their activities, right? When we see changes in the court's activities where Judge Hippler there released an order saying, well, we're not going to do secret stuff anymore. I don't like secret stuff. I don't want secret stuff going on from here on out. We're done with secret stuff, right? Now, I'm paraphrasing. But he definitely said that, right? I mean, and that was an order issued shortly before the release of, I'm trying to look at the exact date right now because I want to get into some of the other court releases here in a moment as well. But that order was released on, looks like March. Let's see here. Looks like March 3rd. So if that's the case, it seems like something preceding March 3rd, but after all these other shenanigans have impacted the change in the mode of operations of the prosecution in this case, be it local, state, federal, whoever's impacting that, it doesn't matter. I suspect there's feuding behind the scenes between different factions on how to proceed forward, especially when they're presented with new obstacles, which is why we see them releasing things despite questioning the veracity of these things. It doesn't matter. They're still releasing these things. They're unsealing these documents, the 911 calls, the DNA evidence. Something's causing them to change their mode of operations to do these things, and I would suspect that could be related to the shakeup in the federal jurisdiction in the state of Idaho, right? So back on November 13th, 2025, the U.S. attorney for the state of Idaho resigned. Well, he was forced to resign. Donald Trump said, "You quit." Told all Biden-appointed U.S. attorneys, "You quit, or I'm going to fire you." Right? So he did the "I'm going to resign" thing, and he went that route. Right? So in that, so that's obviously going to change things, right? So the U.S. attorney's gone. They got a new U.S. attorney, and again, they may be working on the same ends, right? But they're not the same person. They're not going to make the same decisions, and they're not going to have the same strategy, right? So you got this guy who resigned. Again, I haven't done a lot of background on him, but the thing that sticks out to me is he's obviously an attorney, but he's an attorney from D.C. and he worked for Eric Holder's law firm, Covington and Burling in Washington, D.C. Eric Holder, former Obama. I don't do politics, but former Obama attorney general who was held in contempt of Congress, yet faced no consequences. Again, it's not a political thing for me. It's more of a rule of law thing. If we're going to hold someone in contempt, they're going to have to face those consequences. Trump's buddies that were held in contempt, they faced consequences. They were held in contempt of Congress. Steve Bannon and that other little fellow with the glasses. They both went to prison for a bit. But anyhow, this guy, who I would suspect has a questionable background, he resigned. The new guy, though, is interesting. So to speak to this this continued impact of a third party parapolitical kind of impact on the case, the current so he's the temporary. He is the temporary guy. Let me find him real quick here. He's the temporary U.S. attorney until one's appointed, right? So until Donald Trump says, "Hey, we got a new guy appointing here," this is the guy that's filling in for the U.S. attorney position. And his name is Justin D. Whatcott. And guess where he's from? University of Idaho grad, University of Idaho law, interned at Bill Thompson's office for his first job. So if you're looking for, somebody who's going to most certainly seems to want to subscribe to the same politics from the federal and state level, I mean, they got the perfect guy there right now, right? To keep prosecuting this case and keep pressuring this case, right? Now, how long he will be there remains to be seen, because at some point in time, he will likely be replaced via the appointment of a Donald Trump appointed U.S. attorney. I'm not saying that's going to make a difference in this case. I'm just saying it will likely alter the game plan and mode of operations, no different than this last guy termination on February 13th and the subsequent, at least on the surface and to the public, the judge separating himself from the secrecy, despite not objectively separating himself from the secrecy, nor objectively releasing information. This is targeted releases. I suspect it has something to do with a plan B in the future for the state as a soft landing. I don't know. We'll see. This case is going to get interesting because the state never wanted to have to take it to trial, and these roommates become an interesting factor because they're conflicting stories, et cetera, but neither one of them ever want to come to testify. In fact, when Bethany Funk was going to be forced to, or at least seemingly going to be forced to testify in the arraignment hearing back in June of 2023. Well, that's when Bryan Kohberger got indicted via grand jury. So I think that's telling. So again, when you're looking at the chronology of these events and the activities surrounding the prosecution of Kohberger and the parapolitical weight that seems to be weighing heavily on the case, you see situations like the Bethany Funk situation where she's completely excluded from any statements in the PCA, right? The arresting affidavit, just Dylan Mortensen, no Bethany Funk statement. So early on in the case, as a result of that, Ann Taylor and defense team of Kohberger seized on that aspect of the situation. And on March 22nd, 2023, affidavit in support of motion for out-of-state service. So they filed an affidavit with the court to subpoena Bethany Funk for that arraignment hearing in June, right? She had exculpatory evidence, as they said, right? So fast forward, Bethany Funk hires, she doesn't, I don't know how that works. So I thought she hired an attorney. When I relooked at the documents though out of Nevada fighting that subpoena in April of 2023, she's using a public defender's office. I didn't know you could use a public defender's office to fight an out of state criminal subpoena, criminal court subpoena, right? She's not being charged, but she's being subpoenaed to testify in a criminal proceeding. Oh, thank you, Heather. Yeah, I'd love to hear all your thoughts there, Heather, if you've looked at these documents, because again, I'm confused by the nature of hiring a public defender, but I'm also confused by this. So it was later announced. So this is April of 2023, April 24th. This was filed on April 21st, 2023. And so this was filed with the court. They're saying we're not coming to this victim and witness is not coming to the state of Idaho. You have no legal recourse or procedures in which to make that happen, yada, yada, yada. It's reported 6 days later in the media on April 27th, 2023, that Kohberger's counsel and Bethany Funk's counsel have worked out an agreement that they will travel to Nevada to give her a deposition, right? So that's April 27th, right? On May 17th, this is when Kohberger's hit with a grand jury indictment. So I don't know if they ever went and deposed Bethany Funk. I'm not sure that's ever really been publicly stated by any party. But it seems like it's possible they never went, because once May 17th happened, let's say between April 27th and May 17th, they had just simply scheduled it but hadn't achieved the travel and deposition yet. Well, then they probably didn't go, because suddenly, as a result of May 17th, there is no more arraignment hearing on June 26th. So I think these are the games being played. So once Ann Taylor focused on Bethany Funk and exculpatory evidence, fought to get that subpoena between March and April, got the subpoena on April 10th, sent it there. They respond on the 21st. They're like, look, we're not doing it. The attorneys call, they work it out, they go there. And then suddenly, just, what is that? 21 days later, 3 weeks later, grand jury indictment. Why have a grand jury indictment when you have the arraignment hearing on June 26th, 5 weeks after you just got the grand jury indictment? I would argue it's because they were losing the case, right? Immediately, right? With it seemed to me that Bethany Funk's statements, and this is my assessment still at the time here, if Bethany Funk's statements had weight to it, because otherwise they wouldn't have come down with a secret grand jury indictment. A secret grand jury indictment that we're now learning at least a year after the fact, and coming to understanding here recently, because I just presumed as much, we're now learning for a fact, according to that media report, there is a federal grand jury indictment against Kohberger. Right. So he can't be tried in both courts. That's double jeopardy. So what I'm saying here is they're even admitting, they tacitly admit it in the hearing, but they full on admit it in that media article. So I want to know where they got that source. I'll probably look further, but what I'm saying is the violations are extensive here of Kohberger's rights, not to mention the violations of any public trust in these institutions locally, not to mention the victims' families having any justice for the murder of their family members, so it takes a lot of political weight and power to do these things. And again, when you have the lead detective on the stand, making these kind of, ridiculous statements like, oh, well, yeah, I relied on that video to in my signed and sworn affidavit to arrest your client there, Ann Taylor, but I don't know where that video is today. You're gonna have to ask the FBI. Like, that's not a legitimate answer in any legitimate court of law. That's not a legitimate answer. That's what I'm saying. Even the idea of them having this grand jury is preposterous. You can't shield evidence from a separate grand jury that you're not prosecuting somebody under, right? That indictment, they're prosecuting under the state indictment. So again, I think that right there is very indicative of the level of shenanigans and the level of parapolitical power that is truly involved here in this case. And we'll watch a clip here of Brett Payne for a moment to see him describe these details of the missing video.
Conduct or direct interviews?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you search for a suspect?
Yes, ma'am.
Were you the go-to person and the person in charge for evidence that would be brought into Moscow Police Department to support your case?
No, ma'am, I was not.
Who's in charge?
That would have been our evidence custodian.
As the lead detective, were you aware of the evidence that would be under the control of the evidence custodian?
Not entirely. I was made aware of basically the most pertinent evidence that was coming in, but I was not aware of every single piece of evidence that was brought into the police.
Okay. During the course of, I guess, the investigation from November 13th forward, was there videos that were collected, like a video canvas done of the community?
Yes, ma'am, there was.
Is that something you were involved in?
No, ma'am, I was not involved in the direct collection of those videos.
Who is responsible for the video collection and knowing what videos exist?
So the way that worked was individual investigators who went out in the community and collected those videos, brought them back to the police department and provided them to our digital forensics office, and then they were later booked in through that channel.
So the digital forensics office would be the responsible entity to receive these pieces of video surveillance, is that right?
Yes, ma'am, I would say it was a dropping off point for those pieces.
So you can see he's playing the games with those videos. When he's saying he traveled a great distance, what they're talking about, I just want to got about another minute on that video clip, but I wanted to interject here. What she's talking about there is this. So this is back in December 16th, right? Idaho murder investigators traveled at least 24 miles to collect surveillance video related to the killings, right? That 24 miles is east out Taylor Road, State Highway there, east of town. 802 Taylor Road. When traveling those 24 miles, on whomever Payne is describing who actually collected those videos that he has no idea the whereabouts of, that he relied upon in his affidavit, apparently, at least some of these videos he's mentioning there, but this is the 24-mile jaunt he was referencing. Now, they drive right past 802 Taylor Road, which is seen here. Oh, I got that. There we go. 802 Taylor Road is the gas station. In December 15th, notified law enforcement and police that they had seen a white car traveling, right? And around, I think, 3:45, right? The time they were asked to, the time that the Moscow PD asked folks to look for videos when their search back on December 7th, when they announced to the world, we have no idea, we need your help. Roughly a week later, the night manager here at this gas station is like, oh, shoot, I got that. And then sends it into the law enforcement media. What does law enforcement do? They come shut down the gas station with a yellow tape, right? They put a sign on the door that's closed and close the whole place down. The car drove past there over a month prior to this. Not only are you going to never stopped at the gas station, it just drove by on the videotape. So what they're yielding from doing these activities, to me, it just seems like they were butthurt that anyone even looked for video evidence, because clearly they didn't. I would actually suspect some of the evidence they claim to have on videos they don't have. And that's kind of borne out by some of Ann Taylor's comments in that same hearing in May of last year, when she's asking for a key piece of evidence from a pot dispensary on the Washington-Idaho border on the Washington side, claiming that she has that piece of evidence. But as he states that he sees that car come through there at a time, she claims otherwise. So I would argue, what do they have, right? Again, they allegedly only based their identification of the vehicle off of one video there on Ridge Road. So it's it's an interesting dynamic of these videos and the games they're playing there. But let's see if I can finish out that clip here for us.
Conduct or direct interviews?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you search for a suspect?
Yes, ma'am.
Were you the go?
It won't let me fast forward. I should never have stopped it. That's my fault. Anyhow, we got the long and the short of that game they're playing. When he starts telling him about the FBI again, it's the FBI's grand jury, which I thought at the time, like, that has to be the only way he's getting away with this. Like, it's the legal loophole, right? That's the legal, like, when I look at all of these things in this case, I look at them through the lens of what's the legal loophole they're going to try to do next, right? Or what does this action have to do in the context of they're doing this action, not objectively prosecuting the case, not objectively searching or trying to convict the killer, but this legal loophole strategy. And, you know, that seems to be what was going on there, in my opinion. And again, to me, it just speaks to this volume of tomfoolery in the case, right? Where if this was a legitimately prosecuted case, if this was a case that law enforcement objectively investigated, right, we would not have all these conflictions. We wouldn't have all these, again, outright lies, in my opinion. When you quote, again, it's the legal loophole of the matter. That's how they seek to get around it, the plausible deniability. But when Brett Payne quotes frozen shock phase, citing Dylan Mortensen, and no actions taken later when that story's changed. And again, it's not like they didn't know these text messages existed. They just unsealed them now. We know they existed. And Taylor's been screaming her client's innocent for years now. Well, how long has she known that they never tested this blood? How long has she known they never tested this evidence under the DNA evidence underneath the fingernails of Madison Mogan? Presumably, she's known a very long time, but we're just now learning this publicly because it's, due to the unprecedented nature of secrecy in this case, it's just getting unsealed now publicly. But I suspect she knew a long time ago, right? So when she's making these public statements that she has made in the past, professing her client's innocence, well, I suspect that's because I've long suspected that's because she knows a lot more than we know publicly. And these are good. I think these are very good examples of that, right? That she knew these things long before. So again, it's, so if we're gonna accept the political power, we're gonna accept the drug situations going on, right? If we're gonna accept the some of the, these things play into the environment, right? These murders did not happen in a vacuum, right? These murders occurred, with all these other factors going on. If it's not directly related, right? Which again, I'm painting a picture of the environment these things happened in, and providing some, very plausible and reasonable instances where these things may have intersected and affected this case, the investigation, the prosecution, but also, perhaps even the murders themselves. I'm saying it's all of these things collectively that the environment these murders existed in, and that it's collectively these things that are impacting this case. And again, the cover up, the prosecution, and potentially even the murders themselves. So, this is a publication out of 2019, taking a quick look again back at the drug stuff, rehashing that briefly again. I forgot to show this. This was a publication over there, the Daily Evergreen, out of the Student Voice of Washington State University, right? This was a press release from the Drug Task Force on April 9th, 2019. Now, they're talking right here about the pill stamping operation. But again, finding any evidence of this, and again, it involves people like Gary Jenkins, right? Again, he helps oversee that task force on the board, along with other law enforcement leaders and prosecutors in the immediate surrounding vicinity and counties and towns. But they don't go into details here. And again, I've searched through some other materials to locate what I suspect is the organization involved. But there's seemingly no prosecution for these people. So, and it's really a offhanded comment he makes here too. This officer here, Officer Brock Germer, get a new name, dude. Brock Germer. He said he worked a case where a fraternity pressed their own Xanax pills in Pullman. Yeah. Now, there is record of these activities if you search long and hard. There's no record of any prosecutions in these activities. So, again, how do these things go on in that town? And there's nothing really comes of it, right? There's really no prosecutions. These things continue to go on. The people prosecuting, Prosecuting Kohberger, they know about it. They're the ones overseeing these drug task force activities on the Quad City task force level. Now, when we're talking the federal task force level, that's going back to the state's attorney general's office. This one's the U.S. Attorney's Office out of the Western District of Washington. They have 2 districts. Idaho's got 1. So they have a U.S. attorney in charge of this. But nonetheless, this guy was there out of the Seattle district, right? He was previously deported from the Eastern District of Washington from 2005. He's a Mexican cartel cartel leader and drug trafficker. He's been deported numerous times, convicted for distributing cocaine back in 2005 in Washington State University. And this dude just keeps coming back to Washington State, and they followed him for 18 months, arresting him in 2020 here, it looks like. Right. So I'm sorry. Well, the press release is 2023. It's other members, looks like, in the extensive drug trafficking organization following an 18-month investigation. Ordered drug shipments and directed underlings to process drugs for distribution, yada, yada, yada. 12 pounds of heroin in this case, 45 pounds of meth, 3,200 fentanyl pills, 22 firearms, right? Again, this same dude, the same cartel leader who repeatedly keeps coming back to Washington, came back there in 2019 for this instance, looks like. He was busted in 2005 there for cocaine trafficking on Washington State University, right? So you mean to tell me this dude's not coming back to fertile hunting ground, if you will, some where the customers are abundant and always coming back for more. You got a constant fresh flow of new faces every year, right? This dude's coming right back there in that same area and dealing more drugs. And again, he's busted receiving a shipment in Seattle. Where was that shipment going? Was he going to drive it back down to Washington State University for distribution? Perhaps. That's what he did before, right? He came back to the U.S. for something. Again, lucrative effort. He's going to go back where the money was, right? And one note here I forgot relative to drugs, the university, etc., and the chronology of events that occur in this case where, there things happen and there's, actions and reactions and whatnot, right? So you have that March 22nd, 2023 subpoena for Bethany Funk to come testify with exculpatory evidence in the future arraignment hearing of Bryan Kohberger. And 2 days later, March 24th, 2023, University of Idaho student Caden Young died in Western Washington. 2 people arrested on drug charges in connection to his death. Right? 2 folks that have Moscow connections, if not connections to that home, which appears to be an accurate statement as well, through parties such as the elusive 6th roommate, perhaps. Nonetheless, Emma Bailey and Demetrius Robinson were later arrested, charged for delivery of a controlled substance. Later had charges, I believe, of some sort of other charges later, but all these charges were dropped. So it begs the question, Caden Young quits his fraternity as a president 2 days after Bethany Funk's going to be forced to come to, perhaps forced to come to an arraignment hearing in Idaho with exculpatory evidence, it seems, right? The frat president from University of Idaho who quits dies of a hot shot in Seattle from 2 Moscow drug dealers. Again, the younger of which, Emma Bailey, appears to have associations with the house through alleged 6th roommate being Instagram friends. And I would actually assert you could possibly see her on police body camera footage at a September party there at that house, leaving the home as the police arrive. Can't be confirmed. To me, it looks a lot like her, but nonetheless, it's odd, these chain of events, right? The 22nd, Funk might have to come provide some, suddenly this case you thought you had wrapped up already from when you arrested the guy in January and try to railroad him, try to fast track the case. They try to fast track the case. And then Kohberger waives his right to a speedy trial. Then they're like, whoa, wait a second. Well, now that you've done that, we're not going to prosecute this case for a couple years. And they've been dragging their feet ever since. So they're playing these games all the time. And again, it's not Bill Thompson making these calls. In fact, you can see, I think I said this on Kane's show recently because he said, he asked me, what's Bill Thompson got all this steam coming out of his ears for? That's because someone's lighting a fire under his ass. That dude looks upset and butthurt at all times, but I don't doubt that he is. not this, he doesn't have to have any foreknowledge of any of these activities. He may just have to be told what to do, shut up and color, keep your job, keep your pension, keep your life for that matter, right? Who knows what they tell somebody like that, but just because he's prosecuting the case in doing it in a very shady fashion doesn't mean that he had foreknowledge of it, right? Those things aren't necessarily accurate. Those don't necessarily go hand in hand. But there is no shortage of reports. Again, both the eastern side and western side of the Quad Cities regional drug task force. Here's another instance. 1,350 fentanyl pills seized after a lengthy investigation that started. This is the Idaho side of that. There's the west side, east side of the task force. This is the east side that started in 2022, right? So it's down in Clarkston, Lewiston Police, but it's, it's the neighboring town. That's what I'm saying. Like, there's no shortage of, large scale drug trafficking in and around this area, in and around these organizations. And again, what are they doing with the money, and what are the police doing? Why are they out to lunch, right? Here's another case right here. To be quite honest with you, most of these cases involve Mexican drug cartels, not just the leader, the guy busted over there who had done the cocaine trafficking. This one's out of Nampa. This is one of the drug cartel related ones that led into a more extensive investigation. This investigation into Gonzalez began after a 911 call in March of 2022, led to the discovery of a man who died from fentanyl overdose in Lewiston, Idaho, right? The text message on the deceased man's phone traced the source of the drugs back to Gonzalez. So he was part of a much larger, so this is April, May 2022, right? And this is being handled by the feds, right? The Northern Idaho Violent Crimes Task Force, in conjunction with the Quad Cities Task Force right here. Northern Idaho Violent Crimes Task Force. So those are the folks that are prosecuting this case against Kohberger. The people that comprise the board of that task force, the drug task force, and the violent crimes task force is headed by an FBI agent involved with the case, or is led by an FBI agent involved with the case, and he reports to that U.S. attorney directing the matters of that violent crimes task force. So, to say these people don't know each other, they obviously know each other, right? Like, and they know the drugs that are going on around town. One thing could be said: if there is sex trafficking amongst the sororities, perhaps they don't know about that, but I would say they probably know about that. Because again, I suspect a lot of that money that was getting, laundered may have been getting laundered somewhere in the past. These fraternities and sororities maintain large accounts, banking accounts. They have students that manage these within the fraternity, right? They have a treasurer. They have boards with each one of these organizations. They have national boards. All of these folks maintain order, power, and money within these organizations as well. So it's a hierarchy for sure, but I'm just saying it's possible even some of the locals may not know about it, but the money would probably still be going somewhere, and maybe they're laundering it through fraternity and sorority accounts before. Maybe the drug suppliers, the Mexican drug cartel, was assisting in laundering the money as well. Maybe those things were all going on, and maybe President Scott Green and his friends decided, you know what, we have a new deal, and this deal is going to be an FTX crypto money laundering operation. We're going to operate out of this bank we just seized and took over and paid a bunch of people off for, right? Because again, the machinations of that network started in 2018 on record, and Scott Green takes a job in 2019. The bank's bought out in 2020 and busted in 2022. So again, it's the chronology of events that go on around here and the people that Scott Green associates with. But before I get into that aspect of it here and more of the crypto and money laundering operations, or the crypto stuff that his firm is deeply involved with, both of his last two firms. So from 2013 or 2012 to 2016, he was the CEO of a different international multinational corporate law firm. They just happen to represent FTX in the bankruptcy. Now, there's actually been articles on Wall Street saying, like, why do these companies that are all associated with, there's other companies these people can hire. Why do they keep hiring these same companies? So I'm not the first person to ask these questions. People within the industry are like, wait a second here. This seems suspect. And then, of course, Scott Green's associations with folks like Leon Black, Apollo Global Management, right? The guy he decided to call on Wall Street when he wanted to finance that University of Phoenix deal once he took the job there at Idaho. It's like, yeah, we're going to purchase University of Phoenix. The state told him not to. He's under various actions and activities surrounding this. The deal's never gone through. He's violated rules and regulations clearly, seemingly abundant, number of times here. I mean, there's no shortage, it seems, at least, right? In fact, that it's been documented that they made up a fake buyer in which to do a bidding war against. So that's the level of criminality that's going on in this, in that acquisition. I have some ideas of what that may be for and whatnot, and I'll dive into that more in the future, in a future here episode of Operation GCD Live. But we'll stick to the idea here of his relationship with Leon Black. Scott Green, that is. So that's who we call it, Apollo Global Management. They're the ones financing this buyout, right? Leon Black has paid nearly $200 million. Wait, let me take that back. He's paid over $200 million to Jeffrey Epstein, and or settlements to Jeffrey Epstein's clients, right? The $150 million to Epstein, there's questions around it. No one's really ever known. There's ongoing investigations right now from, I believe it's the SEC and Congress over these matters regarding Leon Black, Scott Green's buddy, and Epstein. So he paid Epstein, I believe, $150 million on record, and then he later would pay, I don't know how this works out, he paid the U.S. Virgin Islands government $60 million to make sure there was no more future problems for him with all these Epstein victims. Again, not for Epstein's misdeeds, for Leon Black's misdeeds. Leon Black has a history of money laundering. He, and these are the people that Scott Green associates with, a kid diddling money launderer who, friends with Epstein, who, apparently thought it was a good business move to get into business with this guy to purchase the University of Phoenix. So that's odd. And I'll be closing that out here with the crypto, Scott Green and Leon Black here. But let me highlight one other aspect that really does not sit well with me in the drug atmosphere and culture in and around the university. So you have something called the Lasalle County Lasalle Recovery Center. This is their local drug rehab place there in the county. This is folks appear to get sent here by the court for court-ordered drug rehab, etc. It may mean nothing. It may mean something. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there for grounds for further research. Folks of the interwebs, by all means, feel free to look into it yourself. This entire recovery center's board of operations is run by former members of and retired members of Moscow PD and a few real estate agents. So one thing that's seemingly been an interesting aspect of this entire matter around the environment of this town is the real estate. Who pays the taxes, right? Who funds the town, right? Because the university's tax-free. Christ Church is tax-free in their property ownership. That's the majority of the town's property, right? So who's paying property taxes around here? Who's financing these organizations? And why the hell is Moscow PD so wrapped up in drug recovery there? So, and again, a few it's like 3 Moscow PD dudes, 3 real estate agents. And I'm not denigrating the guy. I'm not making this up. A gay cowboy. He calls himself a gay cowboy. I don't know what his professional background is. I don't know if it's gay cowboying. It might be. I'm not sure. But it's an odd organization. And their names are all listed right here on their website. I'll leave the mystery up to y'all. You can figure out who the gay cowboy is. And again, this was that cocaine trafficking incident I mentioned before. Literally trafficking the cocaine out of the sorority house, right? And when one thing I hear about a lot is, these kids and the victims, their friends, etc. They're just nice college students. They're sorority and fraternity members. They're honor students, etc. Honor student dealing cocaine out of the sorority house on Washington State University. 21-year-old Sierra M. Windsor. Now, she did go to jail. I don't think she got a heavy sentence, but don't quote me on that. They were tracking her for months. She's selling it for months, right out of Sigma Kappa. This one, right outside Sigma Kappa in this one, yeah. This was not the same one as the Alpha Phi incident. So, we got multiple cocaine incidents over there, looks like, right? Multiple cocaine incidents. And that was, I apologize, I didn't give you a date on that. It was, that one was 2016. It's 2016. That's what I'm saying. So it's a historical trend. It's an ongoing historical trend. We have an honors, because everyone says, well, these honor students, I've gotten this a lot. These honor students aren't involved in drug trafficking. Oh, really? Because here's an honor student, same university, involved in drug trafficking. So cocaine trafficking out of the sorority house. So, I don't think I'm really asserting too much to say that a off-campus home would be used as a drug distribution point if they're using the on-campus homes as well. Again, that pill stamping operation, while I can't prove it, by all appearances, it was going on in the fraternity house. And folks don't know, pill stampers, here in Appalachia, we've had a lot of opioid problems over the years. I'm not one of those people with that problem, but I'm one of those people that care about that problem. And I'm aware of the ins and outs and procedures that go on in some of these operations of the opioid epidemic, some of which include pill stamping, not just from pharmacies. And those pill stampers are highly regulated machines. And when I say highly regulated, you could probably buy some, start making, buying ammonia or fertilizer quicker than you can buy a pill stamper machine without getting caught. You know what I mean? So how they got the pill stamper machine, I don't think anyone ever asked that question, because it doesn't seem like anything was ever really prosecuted from it. So on to Mr. Leon Black and Scott Green and their very, very contentious acquisition of, and I'll go over some of those ongoing investigations of Mr. Leon Black. So Scott Green, Apollo Global Management, Leon Black acquisition of University of Phoenix. It's funny. So 2 weeks ago, I did an occult and or esoteric review of the film 1991 cinematic masterpiece comedy Pizza Man, starring Bill Maher, where he's a pizza delivery guy in LA in the early 90s, and he's fighting all these weird characters in this organized crime outfit that's ultimately run by Donald Trump. Now, I think there's a lot more meanings behind these things with the term pizza, and the fact that this is the same year that the film was made that Bill Maher creates his production company, Kid Love Productions. That's the name of it. Very odd. But one of the characters in that film that Bill Maher is fighting is a guy by the name of Michael Milken. It's an associate of Donald Trump. And, again, Donald Trump's the overboss in the little organized crime outfit in the film. And it's just weird. So I'm talking about Michael Milken. Michael Milken's underling, he was the mentor to Leon Black, right? They ran a company called Drexel Burnham Lambert, I believe it was. And in 1991, they I'm pulling it up here. While I'm hemming and hawing, I'm pulling it up here. But yeah, in 1991, they got busted for their Ponzi scheme. Where did I put this? Holy smokes. Stand by 1 second, please. They got busted for their Ponzi scheme. Michael Milken goes to prison. I think 10 years, pays restitution. Leon Black, no restitution, no prison. Which, when you look at his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, yeah, junk bonds. Thank you. Yep, junk bonds. They were the junk bond kings, right? So, which leads me into, well, when you look at his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, it becomes odd. Black's, that is. So Black runs a Ponzi scheme. It's the largest at the time. This is before Bernie Madoff. This is like $500 million, like 1991. It's related to the Iran-Contra BCCI money laundering scandal, right? So, they get busted. Milken goes to prison, pays restitution. Leon Black, no restitution, no prison. Their Ponzi scheme just beat out Jeffrey Epstein's Ponzi scheme just a few years earlier. If folks don't realize, Jeffrey Epstein ran something called Towers Financial, this debt collection financial organization, with a fellow by the name of Steve Hoffenberg. Well, Offenberg goes to prison for like 17 years and pays full restitution. Jeffrey Epstein, no restitution, and walks. So it's weird to me that Epstein and Black would become such buds, in the aftermath of these activities. But nonetheless, Leon Black seems to be a prolific, kind of spooky money laundering guy who's ran this big Ponzi scheme. And I say spooky money laundering guy related to BCCI. So, they were the junk bond kings. However, last week's show, I discussed F. Lee Bailey and the comparison of the O.J. Simpson case and the Idaho 4 case comparison, right? And I discussed it. I am disgusted by him, but I discussed F. Lee Bailey, one of O.J.'s quote unquote dream team. I would argue is more of a nightmare team. Nonetheless, F. Lee Bailey was called before Congress in the Iran-Contra BCCI portions of the Iran-Contra scandal because for whatever reason, he was a director of a bank there, and I believe it was Georgia. Syntech Financial, I believe was what it was called. I could just look it up rather than guess. But during the BCCI, the Bank of Commerce and Credit International, that was run by literally CIA agents on its board, doing the money laundering for the drug and gun running scandals associated with Iran-Contra, Arkansas, the Nicaraguan arms trade, etc. All that money is being funneled through these organizations, these BCCI, and then they started, when they couldn't launder enough money themselves, they started buying out other banks. They bought this bank, and F. Lee Bailey was the director of it, right? The Syntech Financial. And Syntech Financial, when the Milliken Black Ponzi scheme falls out, basically at the same time here in the early 90s, it turns out that F. Lee Bailey's running that bank, and they're the largest owner of the Milliken Black junk bond sales, right? So they were, it's kind of an earlier effort of the 2008 CDO collateralized debt obligation crash that helped crash the housing market, where they're wrapping up all these bogus mortgages into securities where you can bet whether or not they're going to fail or not. It's in a similar capacity with these junk bonds, right? But nonetheless, F. Lee Bailey, the guy I'm talking about last week on OJ's team, in comparison to this case, he's related to the same scandal. So you see this kind of ongoing throughput of money laundering activities, spook activities, right? BCCI, CIA operations, drug and money laundering. They're buying out other banks when they can't, they bought a 25% stake in this bank that F. Lee Bailey was running, right? And then they were buying out all these junk bonds, right? So again, huge Ponzi schemes. It's like multiple Ponzi schemes mashing together. Nonetheless, this is Leon Black's wheelhouse. This is his territory. This is also the territory of Sam Bankman-Fried's partner, the Deltec Bank owner and chairman, the creepy French fellow, Jean Chalopin. And they just happen to be operating in the same locations, right? I'm not saying F. Lee Bailey's dead, but the Bahamas and Miami link, right? That's where the BCCI was, and that's where the Deltec Bank and Bankman-Fried situation is, right? And again, John Chalopin has been dealing in these creepy business or financial dealings, much like Leon Black, for many decades, right? So it's odd to find the confluence of these known money launderers connected to things like BCCI, and they're converging, amongst in and around Scott Green, in and around Moscow, Idaho, in and around 2019, right? Because you have the SPF Deltec Bank situation popping off there with Farmington State, what would be Moonstone. You got, at the same time, you got Scott Green coming to town. You got him teaming up with Leon Black. These people know each other. These money launderers and operations that, they know each other. So not to mention, again, the direct connections with Scott Green's both of his former law firms representing FTX, right? Both the last two law firms. So very, very interesting. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention this bank. So this is a kind of a pre-Iran-Contra, but, part of Iran-Contra, the drug and gun running, smuggling and money laundering stuff. This is a bank out of Australia they set up, right? When I say they, an Australian banker and a CIA agent named John Michael Hand. He's gone by various names. I believe the name he was going out at the time was John Michael Hand. It's called Nugent Hand Bank. Francis John Nugent. It collapsed in 1980. Francis John Nugent was a banker and a lawyer there in Australia. And he teamed up with a guy with the bank's co-founder, American Michael John Hand. Right now, Francis Nugent allegedly commits suicide. The bank fails. Michael John Hand and two other bank employees were indicted for conspiring to pervert the course of justice by destroying or removing bank accounts. Right. However, this dude also walks. Michael John Hand. Do you know where they find him? That's 1980. You know where he pops up? An Australian author writes a book about the subject in 2015. He finds Michael John Hand living under an assumed identity in Idaho Falls, Idaho, the other side of the state. But Idaho is apparently known for harboring known money launderers and CIA operatives, right? Again, CIA operative, deeply involved in the Lansdale team and stuff in Southeast Asia for years preceding 1980. But in 1980, that bank collapsed, and then he went to go live in obscurity under an assumed name in Idaho. So Idaho's already hiding CIA agents and money launderers. So it's an environment that it's not unfamiliar with them, I think, up there. I'm not saying the whole state of Idaho, but I'm just saying at least the power structure, the government, the folks that are pulling the strings up there, right? So, which is again what we're talking about here, the parapolitical activities. So, would it be weird for future money laundering, cryptocurrency money laundering situations to set up shop in this immediate region when, this dude, he lived in obscurity for what, 35 years before anyone found him up there? He allegedly died last year. John Michael Hand, and I forget his pseudonym, but he was definitely living up there. He's a former Green Beret, again, longtime spook, deeply ingrained within the upper echelons of the CIA for many years preceding 1980, and he was living under the name Michael John Fuller. In 2015, author named Peter Butt wrote Merchants of Menace. He found Hand living under the name Michael John Fuller in Idaho Falls, Idaho. And again, according to all public records, he recently passed. So I just use that as an example to say I don't think it's abnormal to have for these people to find Idaho to be a safe place, right? So we close this out here on these parapolitical aspects with the efforts surrounding Leon Black, Scott Green, the University of Phoenix, an acquisition that makes no sense, right? So when Scott Green takes over in 2019, I've written an article or two about this. Find the links to my link tree and a series I wrote on Substack, or a few chapters I published on Substack of the series. I haven't published them all. Peter Butt, right? That's a good name. It's called entitled "An Isolated Targeted Attack," of course, because of the preposterous statements made in this case. But I point out the financial aspects the university was involved in, the financial environment that Moscow was involved in, at the time of the murders and the years preceding. So when Scott Green takes over in 2019, he is facing he's in the red. The university's in the red. If the university's in the red, the town's in the red. So he immediately fires 150 employees, I believe it was, roughly, I think 8% of their force, maybe, their employees there at the university. The university employs 50% of the town, approximately. So, again, these are all codependent relationships between the university and the town, economically speaking. But he's faced with this, so he, is recovering from that, and then COVID shutdown hits, right, the following year, right? And they're decimated financially by this in 2020. In fact, the spring semester when no students were on campus, they lost $7.5 million. The university did, not the town. The town lost money too. It's a little bit harder to quantify, but they put this together for us in a nice format and fashion to describe how much money the university was losing, specifically because students were not on campus, right? Not because they were using distance learning or whatever else, because they didn't have their butts on campus. So, and they basically said that would be an exponential growth in loss if it continued through the summer semester. So that's 2020. If we apply those same standards, and we'll just be conservative and use the same numbers in 2022 at Thanksgiving break following these murders, 40% of the students did not come back to campus. I think it's approximately 4,200 students. Well, if that's the case. By the university's own numbers, if those butts aren't on campus, they're losing $3 million next semester and $6 million in the summer semester, right? The spring semester and the summer semester with the exponential growth. So, when I say that to say the financial environment they're dealing with when they make this acquisition, an acquisition that makes no sense. The University of Phoenix bailout swindle, May 21st, 2023, right? I won't go through reading these things. I'll put the links, though, in the show notes if folks want to see some of this stuff, because I think this weighs heavily on not only the environment, but I also suspect there's some sort of money laundering aspect to this whole acquisition. I don't know what that might be yet. I just, why else would a money launderer in Scott Green here want to purchase this university against the rules of the state, right? Against all pressure from politically speaking, and again, at a time when Leon Black's facing numerous investigations as it is already by himself, let alone needing more with Scott Green and the acquisition of this thing. So it just doesn't make a lot of sense. University of Phoenix, I'm a University of Phoenix grad, both bachelor's and master's. It's pushed to the military, so that's where I did it on active duty. And I think that speaks to perhaps some of the money laundering aspects that's going on here is the nature in which they're funded already through basically federal funding. But they have private funding and folks take out loans, et cetera. I get that. But I'm just saying the bulk of their operation seems to be weighing heavily on federal financing through the military. Nonetheless, there's no campus, right? They'll lease a building in a town, and the folks that are going to classes, the folks that are online, they're online. So you're basically buying an idea in some servers and some sort of financial transaction, banking aspects to this operation. What they are, I don't know. Whatever, I'm sure they have some internal functions to that. They don't outsource all of that. So the acquisition of this would include some sort of monetary gain in the transactions and processing transactions, right? So I presume that was the ultimate play here, was this some sort of backside infrastructure to the University of Phoenix that incorporates some sort of monetary transactions and processing, right? More to come on that, I'm sure, but nonetheless, this has been nothing but problems for Scott Green, for Leon Black firm that's funding it, right? Again, it's going up to the Idaho Supreme Court right now, right? So this is one from November 14th, 2024. Analysis: the University of Idaho Phoenix talks and where things stand. And it goes over the ins and the outs of the nonsense here. Again, Scott Green, Leon Black and gang literally created a fake bidder in which to outbid. So they're even driving up the rate of this thing. It just makes no sense, right? And again, the university's already broke. The town's already financially devastated as a result of the university's financial problems. So, and then you have Idaho officials are trying to derail a University of Phoenix, University of Idaho deal. Again, politically, the rules of their Department of Education within the state, politically speaking within the state, everyone, the Attorney General of the state, again, the same office that's key in lighting that fire under Bill Thompson's ass, at least being an intermediary party in that, with the deputy attorney generals in the Kohberger prosecution. That dude publicly has made a lot of statements where he's fighting Green on this. So it's an interesting dynamic, very politically speaking. Maybe he's not as black and white and clean and cut as there may be some, internal feuding and battles among some of these factions, whatever. But then you see here, that was in November. Then in December, right? This is December 8th, 2024. Idaho Supreme Court ruling could derail sale of University of Phoenix. So, again, very political, very much an issue for both parties. And, again, at a time when it doesn't make any financial sense, at a time when finances are already bad, at a time when Scott Green was already a contentious character hired as the president, not being of a higher institution employment, not having a PhD, right? And again, he teams up with a guy, right, that's in the midst of a number of and growing number of investigations. This is the one out of Congress. This is back in April of 2024. I mean, they're already initiated the process of this acquisition together, right? Black and Green, but Green and Black. Why their last name's colors? That's fucking bizarre. I just realized that. Senators ask Bank of America for details about Leon Black's payment to Jeffrey Epstein, report says. This is that $150 million payment to Epstein, right? He would later then pay $62 million, I believe it is, to the Virgin Islands. But nonetheless, this is April of 2024. The Senate Finance Committee's subpoenaing that stuff, those records. And we have this, I believe this was an SEC investigation, if I remember correctly. This was an internal. This is my bad. I apologize. This is an internal audit of sorts from his own firm, Apollo Conflicts Committee, right? So there was this committee within Apollo Global Management that formed this committee about these conflicts between Leon Black and Jeffrey Epstein, right? And they hired this firm, Deckert LLP, in which to conduct this investigation of Epstein-Black relationship and any relationship between Epstein and Apollo Global Management, right? And this is 2021. So this is popping off internally, right? And this probably wasn't known publicly then, but it's popping off internally to Apollo Global Management. Internally, they've formed other executives, to investigate the boss, the founder of the firm, Leon Black, and his criminal associations with Epstein. So Scott Green's teaming up with a guy at a very interesting time when he's making these deals too. And here's a different investigation from the IRS into the matter. Wyden unveils ongoing investigation into private equity billionaire Leon Black's tax planning and financial ties with Jeffrey Epstein, right? So the guy's got a full spectrum situation of scandals popping off, right? And again, it doesn't deter Scott Green from saying, you know what? Maybe this kid diddling spook money launderer guy who didn't go to prison for his Ponzi scheme, maybe he's not the best guy to team up with, because he's being investigated for all these criminal misdeeds and whatnot. But didn't seem to deter Scott Green. So if you want to look at the ethics and morals of an individual who may or may not have had a lot of impact in this case behind the scenes, may or may not have dictated a lot of things around the circumstances around this entire situation from start to finish. You got to look at the ethics and morals of the individual there who teams up with a guy who's under numerous investigations, who's, walked away from a huge Ponzi scheme on Wall Street, who is paid out hundreds of millions of dollars to Jeffrey Epstein and his victims. It makes you wonder, like, what is this guy's decision-making process, right? So, Leon Black goes back, career-making 1990 call and a career-ending one in the 210s. Like, he's been all over Wall Street doing a lot of shady stuff for years. He's certainly a questionable character. And again, when you're looking here at the issues surrounding this matter, and again, if you're looking at matters with that kind of, again, walking away from Ponzi schemes, maybe he's being investigated now. To what extent that may ever happen, who knows with Leon Black, if anything will come to that, just like Jeffrey Epstein, right? But it's Scott Green's other folks that the folks he surrounds him with, besides this guy, even, right? The associations with his old law firm, right? Because again, as I mentioned before, folks on Wall Street are asking, why does FTX have these close associations with only these few firms, right? And again, two of the firms, one was representing the merger that failed out that caused the bankruptcy, and the other one's representing him in bankruptcy, the one he led before that. So, and again, I'm not the only one to start asking questions about numerous big law firms have zero ties to Sam Bankman-Fried. So why does John Ray hire two deeply conflicted law firms, right? It's a great question. It's a very great question. The same question can go for, why does Scott Green hire Leon Black? Like I said, like I just pointed out, why does that happen? So it makes you wonder. So then you're looking at more of these details. And again, I'm just saying some outline, before I finish this off here and close it out, folks here. And I appreciate folks stick with me. I seen some good comments here in the chat, but I've been trying not to get distracted in which to make this case here. But I do appreciate the commentary as I try to read it here. But I will close it out here with the Bankman-Fried crypto Scott Green situations, right? So a man with questionable morals and ethics, and seemingly endless amounts of parapolitical power relative to the situation, makes you wonder who else he might be strange bedfellows with in regards to all these things. But then you see just the crossover from that law firm, people that so this one's people that work for him there, right, that later went on to go do different things and vice versa. So this one, mainly government, right, government regulators, right, and whatnot. Congressional fixture Burr Green heads to Hogan levels after 6 years on Intelligence Committee, right? So that was shortly after Scott Green had left in 2021. But, presumably there's other instances. This is one of the more notable ones. Somebody who was a lawyer in a very high-ranking government position there in Congress, right? The Intelligence Committee, again, spooks, money laundering, right? You got the attorney from the Democrat attorney, again, not playing politics. He's just Democrat attorney, high-ranking Democrat lawyer who was a fixture in the Democrat ranks of Congress on the Senate Intelligence Committee. Well, they lost their power in the Senate, right? So, they have at various times, during the Trump administration and whatnot, specifically a lot of the investigations were focused, he would have been on the opposing side of those kind of investigations, right? Or at least trying to shut them down. Nonetheless, this guy just seems to be, when you're talking spooks, you're talking stuff, power, you're talking parapolitics, talking money laundering, and this law firm, Hogan Lovells, that Scott Green ran and was the chief financial officer of, it seems indicative of possibly a larger culture going on there where they're, back and forth with these kind of upper, spooky lawyer jobs in Congress, and then doing this weird, banking and crypto regulation, or not doing it, right? Because if they're advising Congress on regulating things, and then the feds just look the other way when Bankman-Fried and constituents, criminal cohorts purchase that bank and break all the rules, like, what's the good of the regulation at the beginning? And again, you're dealing around the same firm that other folks on Wall Street have been like, hey, wait a second, why is it always these two firms? And in this instance, this was when they officially hired, this is before the merger. So they would later hire in 2022, like I said, Binance and FTX for the merger. But this was previous dealings that same year. Hogan Lovells advises FTX Ventures on its seed investment in Cambridge-based gaming developer. Now, I'll probably have more on this in the future. I have found some interesting details I think maybe worth unpacking, but I'm just showing this here as to show a continuing ongoing relationship from the the regulatory hearings on Congress where Sam Bankman-Fried's asking for these regulations he's paying folks off to violate already, right? And so that's an odd environment. The folks Congress are looking at is Hogan Lovells. They're like, hey, Hogan Lovells, what do you guys think? You're the expert, right? You tell us what to do. And they're again, both firms that Green ran, Hogan Lovells and the previous one, Thomas Pepper Thomas or whatever it's called. Give me a second, I'll tell you. They're both involved in the bankruptcy, right? So here's the bankruptcy filing. It's an ongoing bankruptcy procedures, obviously, right? But April 8th, 2024, FTX Trading, out of Delaware bankruptcy. And you'll scroll down here and you'll find the both firms here. Hogan Lovells are involved in this. Hogan Lovells right there. And then you got Pepper. Well, maybe Pepper's not in this action. They're definitely involved in the bankruptcy as well. I just, questioning Scott Green's decision-making capabilities, their, actions in life, right? Maybe, makes you wonder, right? Makes you wonder. And again, this firm that he used to run still is very much involved in the regulation and stuff. Again, this is what FTX was trying to do. This is what they paid the Bahamas. They paid Washington off to break the laws there or change them or bend them. But this is a hearing on regulatory stuff, compliance and enforcement out of NYU. So it's not even Congress they're doing. These attorneys from that firm are the go-to folks for this crypto regulation stuff across the board. So this is Christy J. Greenberg. Policy changes still present obstacles for firms regarding crypto stuff. Christy J. Greenberg is a partner at Hogan Lovells and is the former deputy chief of the criminal division of the Southern District of New York. The same Southern District of New York that is currently prosecuting Sam Bankman-Fried, the same Southern District of New York that prosecuted Jeffrey Epstein. So do with that what you will. But I find it interesting. This lady who's the go-to, right? She's the go-to person right now in that firm for crypto stuff. And she came there from the Southern District of New York a couple years ago. And again, it's back to that transition. I know Green's gone, but I'm saying this firm still has this transition they've had for years when he was there and proceeding, that they have this revolving door of power, right? The deputy criminal division, U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, the most powerful district in all the federal law enforcement. She's now the crypto boss, in regulation. So makes you wonder. And I will close this out a little bit more long-winded, folks. I appreciate your time and everyone here, and again the commentary. And wish I had the attention, the ability and attention here to keep up with some of that commentary. But Scott Green, questionable character, right? Money launderers around him, kid dealers around him, Leon Black, spooky stuff, and now that highest level of the Senate Intelligence Committee lawyer, Southern District, number 2 criminal division attorney. Now these people are commenting on the regulations that seem to what went wrong here. Regulations that were violated and no one went to prison except for SBF and a couple of his characters, right? But John Chalopin, he's facing, lawsuits, right? He's facing, he's faced fines. He's had money seized from Deltec, not just the joint ownership of Moonstone. He had money seized from Deltec Bank for money laundering as well, right? And some of that stuff seems to still be ongoing. So, there are stuff still falling out from this, but no one's really been held accountable for it, and that matters. This one's from February 2023. Deltec Bank Chairman John Chalopin, the guy who invented Inspector Gadget, sued in the U.S. for aiding and abetting $8 billion FTX crypto fraud. And again, this stuff's been reported in the media, and maybe not as much as it should be, probably for good reasons, but it's still ongoing. This is February 18th, 2024, just about a year ago. SBF Tether, that's the crypto. That's that Deltec Bank's trying to link crypto and money. Stables, they call them stable coins. That's Tether. And Bahamas Bank accused of secretly colluding. Wait a second, that's not Tether actually. Tether is, I get my cryptos confused. That's not they do run a stable coin out of Deltec Bank, but that's not their stable coin. Tether is the stable coin by a different Different kid diddler, Brock Pierce. That's right. My mistake. Too many kid diddlers surrounding this crypto stuff. I'll tell you that much. He was at the, strangely enough, in Parapolitics, old tether there, Brock Pierce. He was a Mighty Ducks actor. Famously was the boyfriend of a major kid diddler in Hollywood about 25 years ago. He was 16. The guy was funded by David Geffen and Steve Bannon, strangely enough, to run something called Den. And Den turned out to be a den of diddlers living in a mansion in around Hollywood, where a bunch of people like Bryan Singer and Congressman Gary Huffington makes an appearance. That was a film called Open Secret that covered that. It's a pretty good film, but yeah, nonetheless. So you have this weird confluence of these kid diddlers and human trafficking and money laundering and crypto. And Scott Green's fine to be bedfellows around with these characters, it seems. So these are the parapolitics I'm referring to when I say something is forcing this prosecution, right? And again, you see the change of command there at the U.S. attorney level, right? You see, all this other strange stuff going on around. And again, folks not really being held accountable even for when they are kind of getting busted, right? So it almost implies like there's an ongoing parapolitical power that's causing these people to walk and not get really busted, right? I mean, again, hard to tell what's going to go on with SBF. He's involved with a lot of other money laundering, like Ukraine money laundering, but nonetheless, his buddy John Chalopin walks, a guy who ran Hexcoin. I think I saw a comment a little bit ago. Steve Gonzalez famously wore a hat that said Hexcoin, right? In numerous interviews in December 2022, which just said Hex, right? In numerous interviews in 2022 discussing his daughter. In fact, for whatever reason, he's got an IMDb page picture with that same hat on. I don't know what that's about, but that company was run by a guy named Richard Hart. He gets busted 6 months later, or eight months later, maybe July 2023, for literally the same things that Binance, FTX got busted for in these Ponzi schemes. This Hexcoin's busted for the same stuff by the Department of Justice, right down in Miami, right? Same areas these things are operating out of. I don't know why he wore this Hex hat. It's very odd. But again, roughly 6 months after this incident where he's wearing this hat in numerous interviews across the month of December, that company gets busted. Recently, Richard Hart walked. So again, maybe Sam Bankman-Fried is going to get held accountable for stuff. Only time will tell. But Richard Hart and Hex, he just beat the charges, right? Literally, just recently beat the charges. Give me 1 second, I'll pull that up now that I think about it. So what the relationship is with the Hexcoin and everything else like that, I mean, they didn't buy a bank in Monroe, Washington or anything else like that, but they did run a very similar style Ponzi scheme as Sam Bankman-Fried and his FTX, as the Binance folks. That was again, Scott Green's law firm is the merger and acquisitions attorneys for that deal that fell out that caused FTX to file bankruptcy. So there may be more behind the arbitrage and machinations behind that situation, because it certainly seems like an intentional situation, right? Intentional for Binance. Binance is like, hey, we're going to buy y'all out. Oh, sorry, we're about to sign that deal. We just sold all your coins last night. Your company's not worth anything. And then again, the attorneys that are dealing this deal, the merger guy quits the same 2 days later when FTX files bankruptcy. And again, Scott Green knows all these people. Well, the Hogan levels people. He used to be their boss, right? He's probably hired a number of these people, including the mergers and acquisitions guy. As the chief operating officer and chief financial officer, he would at least be involved in that process. So nonetheless, U.S. judge dismisses SEC fraud lawsuit against Hex crypto founder February 28th, 2025. So more people walking. So I'm saying parapolitical powers causing this stuff to happen. Parapolitical powers pressuring the square peg in the round hole to convict Bryan Kohberger, right? So I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, we've seen a little bit of change. That's what I'm saying. I don't know what the past that. I don't know what the what other disposition of these activities is going to occur. I'm just scrolling through the slideshow that I made the other day, but we discussed on Kane's show. But I wanted to demonstrate a couple of the things on here that a follow up, if you will, I discussed on there. So, and it's a lot of questions. Again, I'm going to close this out. I think I beat the crypto diddlers, money launderers, spook situation surrounding Green, FTX, the Moonstone Bank, et cetera, to death here. So I'll close it out by making some statements here on the suspicious activities of the roommates. Because as we learned recently, there's no frozen shock face. You know, again, speaking to the square peg in the round hole, that someone's jamming in to prosecute Kohberger in this case against all evidence, against all reasonable natures, and against the violations of his constitutional rights. We knew, this was December 16th. They're on the first floor, right? January 5th, frozen shock phase. Very recently, 2 weeks ago or a week ago, no frozen shock phase, right? So, I mean, we're just, obviously the activities should be questioned around these people. Where were they that night? What were they doing? We really don't know. They've taken two different paths since that date on 11/13/2022. So, Bethany today, it appears to be, she moved out of state, like I said, fought a subpoena, was afraid of getting arrested if she came back in honoring that subpoena by Idaho authorities. That was her statements, at least. She's apparently attending the University of Reno, Nevada, no longer in the Greek system. You see her holding an ATO flag here, and this is like ATO Sweethearts something or whatever. Seems to be dating a man of Jewish heritage there in the Jewish fraternity ATO, which, from all of my records and understanding, my assessment, is not part of the official Greek organization. They're an unofficial fraternity. So it seems like she's left the Greek system. She doesn't seem to be part of any sororities out there, despite my extensive searching. Certainly not Phi Beta Pi. I don't know how that works out if you try to transfer, but she doesn't seem to be associated with it, right? And again, she's dating a guy that's an unofficial Greek fraternity. So it seems. These are some pictures I compiled from the Instagram. I have a noted theory that I have a lot of questions around Dylan Mortensen's status. So we see Bethany Funk left. I can demonstrate Bethany Funk was a member of Pi Beta Phi at University of Idaho, including a very integral picture that emphasizes 2 points. So we were told Zaina, Maddie had both quit Phi Beta Pi, right? Earlier in the school year, right? Well, I can show you a picture from their Instagram on Rush Week in recruiting. They're not in. Neither is Dylan Mortensen, who should be in there as a sophomore. And, but Bethany and, I'm sorry, not Bethany, but Zaina and Maddie should not be in there, right? They quit, according to reports from that sorority later. They quit earlier in the year, and they're not in the Rush group photos. But again, maybe Dylan Mortensen missed that day. Who knows? But there's other activities around here that I question. And again, Bethany seems to be scared to leave the Greek system. Dylan Mortensen, not so much. So she moves to Boise. That's where she allegedly is at today. You can see her there on the Instagram of Idaho Phi Beta Pi from 2022, and then one from 2021, right? Notably, though, this one's not taken at the sorority house. Again, the photo she's in with the sorority girls and/or functions, like the one you see on the right-hand side here, that's in front of the Phi Beta Pi house. I can find photographs of the other three girls inside this home, right? Being Bethany, Zaina, and Maddie, right? Kaylee Gonzalez was a member of Alpha Phi, or Alpha Pi, whatever they call it. Different sorority, but I can see that all the pictures of Dylan Mortensen at the house or in front of the house, or by herself, like this one on Earth Day, or by this one here in 2021 when she's allegedly a freshman, ostensibly, doing Rush recruiting for that, joining that sorority. But she's standing at a balcony just in front of the murder house, right? So I've actually painted that out here. So if you look here on the picture on the right-hand side here, the balcony, she's standing on the top balcony. You can see this parking lot right here. And that balcony sits right here in this area, right where the cop car was sitting when they pulled over the kids on the band field, right? There's an apartment complex right there. It's literally that balcony right there. And the murder house is just behind it, right? You can see that the same outlook with the parking lot right here and the water tower. Again, most of her photos are in around the murder house relative to these sorority pictures if it's not like a tailgate, right? Or in front of the house. So this picture was May 20th, 2022 here on the left. I re-downloaded it right here in the middle. So I wanted to do a relative comparison to my initial downloads in November of 2022 versus what's there now. And I did find some issues. But this one right here, you see Madison Mogan and Xana Kernodle. That's a big sister, little sister relationship, right? Which I presume is why. I'm sorry, no, it's not. Bethany Funk's Madison Mogan's little sister. Disregard. She's a junior, she's a senior. I presume they, they've been there in the sorority together. I presume that's the relationship of how they got to the house. Bethany Funk, we get to the house because she's Madison Mogen's little sister in the sorority. Dylan Mortensen, inconclusive, right? Kaylee's there. She's friends with Madison Mogen growing up. So you can see pictures here on the right-hand side. This is not from the Instagram. This is from their Facebook, October 3rd, 2022. You'll see Dylan Mortensen there with some other confirmed sorority girls. But again, if you want to LARP as a sorority girl in some sort of drug trafficking network, well, that's a good way to do it. Live in an off-campus house with other sorority girls and then take pictures with them in front of their house and in some of their group activities. But here's the thing. Was it a matter of no one would let this girl in the house because she wasn't an official member? I don't know, but it's weird. Because, again, I can find functions inside the house, videos and pictures. She ain't in them. So this picture here on the left, you'll see Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk. This is August 11th, 2022. This was downloaded in November 2022. That's why it doesn't have the year after it. This picture is no longer on their Instagram page when I did a review last week. So do for that what you will, folks of the interwebs. Then we get on to the more of the mystery with Dylan Mortensen, right? Because, again, like I said, she's still in this Greek life, whereas Bethany's not. Bethany left the state. Dylan did not. Bethany goes back to the University of Idaho, participates in Phi Beta Pi activities and parties. Dylan does. Bethany does not. So this is Dylan in September of 2022. This is apparently Rush Week, and I can find other photographs of the entire group, during the Russian recruiting week there, photos and stuff. Group photos of the entire sorority. Dylan ain't in them. No appearance of Dylan in there at all. But I would later discover this is Dylan's little sister, allegedly, right, on the left. And this is Dylan's big sister here, allegedly, on the right. And the reason I can dictate that is this image from her VSCO account. So this VSCO account I probably discovered, in around Thanksgiving there in 2024 when I was doing my initial assessment and the environment and victims, etc. You'll see Dylan wearing a big shirt in the middle. I have another photo of the same situation, but this is the only one I could find right now. But this is from her VSCO account. Again, she wiped it clean in early December 2022. You'll see a big shirt on her, a little on the girl on the left, and that's the same girl here in the center picture. So that's her big, and then you'll see G big. That's supposed to be Dylan's big. Once your little becomes a big, you become a G big in these systems. So that's allegedly Dylan's big sister, right? She's in the sorority. I can confirm that, but you'll notice this picture right here, not in the fraternity, not in the sorority house. That's in the murder house. You'll see the good times picture right there. So this is that VSCO account, right? It was wiped clean. I think that took this screenshot on December 8th, I believe, maybe December 7th, 2022. All gone. You'll see another picture here. Now, this is interesting to me. So, this picture dated on that VSCO account, you'll see dated November 12th, 2022 at 9 p.m., right? Now, my question here is there, again, murder, it's the murder house. They seem to be dressed up for a party, which goes in line with the story that we're told. We're told that Dylan invited Kaylee back to campus so they could all go to a party, and she was Dylan's plus one. Well, if Dylan's not in a sorority, she ain't a plus one to Dylan. She ain't inviting anybody to these organizations. And it's weird to me that also that Kaylee's not doing functions with her sorority, right? Instead of these alleged, the Pi Beta Phi sorority, which is allegedly she's a member of. So who knows? More on that, I'm sure, but see if I can zoom this in real quick here for us. Confirm that exact time. Yeah, so I think it should be questioned again, given the conflicting their own statements. Frozen shock phase, text messages followed clearly show that that's bullshit. Their activities should be questioned. So they allegedly got home at 1:30 that night. They were out partying separately around town. That's police statements. They arrived home at 1:30. They were the first ones to get home, allegedly, right? Allegedly, because they've had conflicting accounts in Ethan and Zaina's whereabouts and locations and the time they got home. Allegedly 1:45 is what police settled on. And then allegedly at 1:50, I believe, or 1:45, they also said Kaylee and Madison got home. However, Kaylee's sister would allegedly correct that later in a varying timeline correction that police were not interested in, saying they got back, I believe, at 1:56 or 1:53. So, where these girls were that night, Dylan and Bethany, I don't think it's ever been conclusively decided, not publicly or offered publicly, but it does seem like that could be an important factor, especially when you look at some of the activities that they were involved in that we can confirm here by looking at some of these pictures. And again, pictures that, you know, I get it. You know, the whole world's looking at your stuff. Maybe you want to just delete it, whatever. But pictures, it seemed to me to indicate that you didn't want people to see something on some of these pictures. So that picture right there, November 12th, 2022 at 9 p.m. So presumably they went to a party that night after that picture, right? Like that's them getting all dolled up for the party. So, you know, and I discussed this the other night, and I didn't want to go too far into detail on Kane's show when I brought this up, but I did get a good comment from one of the folks that are in his chat regarding these timelines, and that's exactly what I want to point out here. I wanted to bring folks' attention to this, right? So it's the ongoing narrative I've seen, you know, from other folks on the interwebs over time relative to some of this photo account and its pictures, is that this photo, the time you see on this photo is affected by the fact that I downloaded from East Coast time, right? Which is, you know, it's reasonable to assume that and to think that. However, that does not appear to be what the VSCO website says, right? So the VSCO website, and actually, and people who, I don't know this app, it's a photo and video app, I don't know it, but I've read some of the, you know, frequently asked questions and folks' comments in regards to some of these things. And some of the users of this were upset because the system, their app deletes your metadata. So it's not, this time isn't the time you took that photo. This time, and again, this has been a complaint to their system, this time is the date in which you posted the photo. And it's allegedly, according to their own website, allegedly the time is the time you posted the photo, your time, wherever you posted it from, whatever time zone you're in, right? So if she's in Pacific time zone, right, and this was posted at 9 p.m., that would have been 12 p.m. my time. When I'm downloading this weeks later, I don't know how that can really affect it, right? It makes a lot more sense the way they describe it on their own website versus it being 12, you know, somehow accounting for me downloading this photo weeks later and it assigning a new time. They say, and again, people have complained, this app deletes your metadata from your photo, the time and date and everything, and replaces it with the time and date you load it to that website based upon your time zone. So ostensibly, Friday night at 9 p.m. local Moscow, Idaho time, which makes sense. These young college students don't go partying early. I mean, I wouldn't go out until at least 9 or 10 o'clock at that age. So, you know, they're pre-gaming at the house. That makes sense. And they're getting all dolled up, and then they take photos and post it on VSCO before they head out, right? And she takes another photo, a couple other photos there. One on the balcony, looks like on this, you know, up there outside of Maddie's bedroom, and with Madison Mogan there. And that's, you know, the same deal, right? We're looking at 9:03 p.m., right? So maybe they take the photo inside, right? Then they go outside, up on the balcony, right? And they take this photo, and she posts it immediately to her thing, and it's 9:03. If you were to consider this being 9:03 East Coast time, this would be 6 o'clock Moscow time. And while the sun sets at 4:47 that day, that is not an hour after sunset. You know what I mean? Just over an hour after sunset. So the website suggests this is the time in which it was uploaded based upon the time zone in which the person uploaded from, right, and the date. And that makes most sense to me. And again, relative to other things such as the you know, the darkness of outside, et cetera, you know, it seems to indicate it's much later than an hour, like dusk, an hour past sunset. You know, now the next picture here in the middle, she posts this picture, clearly seems to be from November 12th, right? Maybe this is from the party on November 11th. We don't know when the party was specifically. We just know that Kaylee was invited to a party. And we were told that, you know, that these people are all in separate places on the 12th, right? But I'm willing to believe everything we've been told is bullshit, right? I'm just trying to evaluate the details that seem to indicate some of that bullshit we've already identified with the evidence, the storylines, the changing narratives, et cetera. We may have other problems here present just based upon the availability of information of things such as this. So this middle picture, she posts allegedly, whenever this party was it the night of the 11th? Was it the night of the 12th? And they were all actually together and not in separate places? Remains to be seen. But this middle picture with this short Asian sorority sister, she's part of the sorority. I can confirm that. Got pictures of inside the place, etc. This photo is taken or posted November 13th, 2022 at 3:33 a.m. Again, according to VSCO, this is posted at that specific time, her time. If that's the case, I mean, she's asleep, right? Murders are going on in that house, right? Why is she posting photographs from a party that may have occurred the night before or 2 nights before, right? Nonetheless, it seems to indicate when she wiped this clean, there may have been some other reasons behind it, because this don't fit her narrative whatsoever. The frozen shock phase doesn't fit the text messages to Bethany Funk. And I think there's a lot to be said for that, the deleting of this. So she posts this photo next to it on the right, November, with Kaylee. Also, they're wearing the same clothes, or at least ostensibly similar clothes they're wearing, in that picture seen earlier today. I don't think it's the same, but they do look similar in appearance, not necessarily the clothes. I think it's relatively around that same time that photo was taken, in proximity, especially if Kaylee's not on campus, right? She hasn't been living on campus. When is she posing with this photo for Dylan? If it wasn't maybe that Saturday afternoon when that other one was taken, right? With all the roommates. Nonetheless, if you look at this photo, November 13th, 2022, also at 3:33 a.m. So is she posting these multiple photos during the murders and then later deleting this account later? Then we look here on the next slide. She continues to post. These are all things she deleted later. I showed you the deleted screen she did, right? Where she wiped it clean there in the first week of December. So this one with Zana, she posts, "I love you so much, Zan," XAN heart, November 17th, 2022 at 10:40 a.m. So, this is obviously after the date of the murders, but she's continuing to post to that. And then she posts one of Maddie the same day and a minute later, right? I miss and love you so much, Maddie, right? So, which again, that was her big sister allegedly, right? So in the sorority. So I'm sorry, no, I keep messing this up. That's Bethany Funk's big sister. I have a hard time with these big sister, little sister relationships, straighten them out. But no, so I think this grounds for further questioning as far as, are these legitimate timestamps? Is this when she posted these things? Did she post these during the time when she's sleeping, the time when she's already been bullshitted enough times about what she's doing at this very exact time during this precise proximity of the murders? So to me, grounds for further questions. So when I say she didn't leave the Greek life, it was famously throughout many media outlets. And for folks sticking around here this long, I appreciate it. I'll bring this to a closure for us. Many media outlets, reported in October 2023. She's November 2023, year after the murders. This is a couple months after statements from her dad or her stepmother saying she's in isolation. She's, doesn't want to talk to anybody. No one's seen her. In January 2023, outlets went down to Boise looking for her and ended up photographing her younger sister, who's about, I think, a year and a half or 2 years younger, jogging and claiming it was Dylan. Turns out it was her sister. Nonetheless, folks, media outlets seem to be looking for her, and she did seem to be in hiding, but, she had no problem going up to Moscow for the Halloween party and other activities in September here, looks like. So maybe 2 trips. So that's the girl that's sorority sister, is supposed to be her little sister, right? You can see now Dylan on this photo on the left is wearing a G big, right? So she's now, her little sister is now a big sister, so she now becomes a G big sister. And you'll see the little sister here in these other 2 photos, right? So her formerly little sister is now a big sister, and that girl's little sister is the short blonde girl right here. Her name's Jessie Pardo or whatever this is here. Whoever she's the one who released all these photos. Yeah, Jessa Patnode. So all those photos of the Halloween party, the rap songs, the dancing, this apparent Phi Pi party up in Moscow. This was a Phi Pi party in Moscow. These all were, right? So while Bethany's hiding in Nevada, afraid of being arrested, quit the Greek life, Dylan's in Idaho. Dylan's partying at Phi Pi. Dylan's partying in Moscow. What is she doing, right? Is she a part of the sorority? Is she still a college student? These are questions that I think are still left open, but that's the source of those photos that were released. And on that same note, you can see that this Jessa Patnode, right? So she's posting additional photos here in front of this water tower, and that date is this is off her Instagram, not the Instagram of the sorority. That September 18th, 2023, right? Is the date of those photos in front of the water tower. Well, September 22nd, 2024, right? Well, that's so the dates of the photographs with the sisters, the sorority sisters, the big and the littles, that's also September 18th, right? Dated here September 18th. So same with these photos, September 18th, in front of this water tower there on campus. Now, maybe not connected, but on September 22nd to 24th, the Moscow University of Idaho Phi Beta Pi sorority was having a centennial reunion party celebrating 100 years. Was Dylan going up there on the 18th for some pre-gaming parties for this upcoming centennial fair on the 22nd? Inconclusive, but I certainly wonder. So it's notable here, though, when I say things are deleted from the sorority's Instagram page, right? I pointed to one that was already deleted with Bethany and Dylan, right? And standing in front of the sorority house from August 11th. It's now since been deleted. So that water tower, September 18th, is important. So here in this picture, you're going to see in the middle picture, really, I don't know how to zoom, otherwise I would zoom in for you. But in the middle picture, you'll see that water tower in one of the, right here, in one of the pictures, right? And you'll see this picture right here, the one after it, chronologically, this occurred after it, and the one before it chronologically occurred before it, right? The picture before it, right here on the left, the picture after it, right here on the right. And you'll see a date of September 3rd, 2023, right? And we knew the water tower was September 18th. And then the one after it, you'll see a date of October 6th. We know the water tower is September 18th. That's in between, right? You can't click on this water tower picture. It does no longer, the image exists on the overall menu, but I challenge folks, go click on it. See if you can't give me that water tower picture, because I want to know if Dylan Mortensen's in that picture. It's a group picture for whatever party was going on September 18th in front of that water tower. She's wearing the G Big shirt. She's posing with her quote unquote little sister and that girl's little sister in the sorority. But for whatever reason, this picture is not available on their Instagram, despite it clearly being September 18th in the same situation. Now, Dylan's not in these. This is that little sister Jessup Pat node. But again, it's September 18th. So it seems like Dylan was in Moscow for these activities. And it seems like somebody's made sure that this picture, despite it showing up on the feed still, I could not click it. The only thing I could click was the picture before it, the picture after it. When I click on this, it brings me up a different image that's not this image. So whatever's going on there, I couldn't tell you, but it certainly draws into closer, more into questions and what's going on. Again, to demonstrate that I can prove, or I can at least effectively conclude that some of these folks are actually in the sorority. This is Dylan's alleged little sister. You'll see her in the back shot of the back row of this group shot right here. So I can, that's what I mean when I say that I can, it seems reasonable these other people are in there, but I can never find Dylan in any row of any shot within the sorority. And again, could leave some of the other Mortensen stuff for another day. I think I've talked folks' ears off enough here tonight. So if I can bring all this to a close, the surviving roommates have brought more questions than answers in this matter. If anything, they seem to incriminate themselves more over time. Dylan's got a lot of suspicious activities. You ask me, she may in fact be LARPing as a member of that sorority. Bethany has taken a starkly different road in life since this tragic event in their lives on November 13th, 2022. Bethany left the state, refuses to come back due to fear of arrest, and seemingly quit the Greek system. Dylan has not, lives in Idaho, parties at Moscow, parties at the Phi Betas, attends their functions, it looks like, is apparent maybe still LARPing in there, because if she left college there, if she left Moscow and she moved to Boise and even enrolled in Boise, how in the hell would she be part of the Moscow chapter still too, right? So lots of stuff to question there. And again, they're conflicting statements. They're seemingly outright lies. The plausible deniability of law enforcement around this not giving a shit what these kids say, right? What they've never cared. They don't care what Bethany said, never went in the affidavit. They don't care what Dylan does or says. Her conflicting statements don't matter. And this, along with all of these holes in the case, the evidence, and the jamming the square peg into the Kohberger round hole, if you will, none of it makes sense. The only thing that makes sense to me is there's a larger issue going on here. I've painted the environment here tonight, hopefully, regarding the thanks. Regarding the environment these things operate in, the folks like Scott Green associated with the FTX, who bought out the money laundering bank, who's in business with a different money launderer, kid diddler, Leon Black, who's deeply associated with Epstein, making Scott Green's questionable decisions to go into business with these people at a time when the universities broke, when he's breaking rules and regulations of the state. Make it make sense, folks. Make it make sense. I appreciate your folks' time. I apologize I couldn't keep up on some of the chat here and disseminating this dissertation tonight, but I appreciate folks' attention, and I'll catch you next time.
Well, that's it. That's the show here, folks. So the next time you're out on the town, visiting your local watering holes, or perhaps just meandering around, and you hear the unmistakable sounds of metal clanking, and you spot signs of a disturbance, then check your six. Look in that garbage can, 'cause you never can tell. the GCDs may be loose in your town.